I'm the only one who understands you. Those 5 words, whispered in the dim light of Lucas Reed's apartment, should never have been spoken by his neighbor's daughter. The 22-year-old woman standing before him, tears streaming down her face, hand reaching for his, wasn't supposed to be there. Not at midnight. Not like this. Not when every instinct screamed that one wrong move would shatter 3 lives forever. This is the story of a boundary that almost didn't hold. A story about loneliness, temptation, and the razor-thin line between comfort and catastrophe. Before we begin, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to where it all started, to a quiet Brooklyn apartment building where a divorced father tried to start over and accidentally became the center of someone else's unraveling world. The moving truck pulled away at 4:47 p.m. on a Thursday in September, leaving Lucas Reed standing alone in the doorway of apartment 3B with nothing but boxes and the hollow echo of his own breathing. 44 years old, and this was what starting over looked like. 700 square feet of hardwood floors, cream-colored walls that had seen better decades, and windows that overlooked a Brooklyn street he didn't yet know the name of. Lucas ran his hand through hair that had started graying at the temples, a process that had accelerated dramatically over the past 18 months. The divorce papers had been finalized for exactly 93 days. He'd counted every single one. "Dad, this place smells weird." His son Jamie stood in the center of the empty living room, all 10 years of him drowning in a Mets hoodie 2 sizes too large. The boy's backpack sat at his feet like an anchor, and Lucas recognized that look on his face. The same expression Jamie wore every time they had to say goodbye now. Every Sunday evening. Every transition between Mom's house and Dad's. "It's just old building smell," Lucas said, forcing brightness into his voice. "We'll get some air freshener. Maybe one of those plug-in things that makes it smell like... What do you like? Ocean breeze? Fresh linen?" "I like how our real house smells," Jamie said quietly. The words landed like a punch to the sternum, but Lucas kept his face neutral. "Hey, buddy, this is a real house, too. Your room's gonna be awesome. Come look." He led Jamie down the narrow hallway to the smaller bedroom, where afternoon sunlight slanted through the window in golden bars. Lucas had already assembled the bed frame, staying up until 2 a.m. the night before, building furniture in the empty apartment like a man trying to construct a new life from particle board and Allen wrenches. "You can set it up however you want," Lucas said. "Posters, whatever. It's your space." Jamie walked to the window and looked out at the building across the alley. A kid about his age was visible in one of the windows, playing video games. So close, Lucas could almost see the screen. "I'm only here on weekends," Jamie said. "I know. So why do I need a whole room?" Lucas knelt down beside his son, eye level now. This was the conversation he'd been dreading, the one his therapist said would happen eventually. Children were remarkably good at finding the soft spots in their parents' armor and pressing down until something gave. "Because you're not a guest here, Jamie. You're my son, and this is your home. Even when you're at Mom's, this room is still yours. Your stuff. Your space. Always." Jamie's lower lip trembled slightly, a tell he'd had since he was 3 years old, the warning sign before tears. But at 10, he'd learned to fight them back. Lucas watched his boy swallow hard, nod once, and turn back to the window. "Can we order pizza?" "Absolutely, whatever you want." The moment passed, crisis temporarily averted, but Lucas felt it settle into his chest, that specific ache of being a part-time father, of measuring love in weekends and alternating holidays, of building a room for a child who would spend most of his nights somewhere else. They spent the evening unpacking boxes, assembling furniture, and creating the appearance of normalcy. Lucas let Jamie choose where everything went, turning it into a game, making decisions about bookshelf placement feel like adventures. By 8 o'clock, they'd made decent progress, and the apartment had started to feel less like a storage unit and more like a place where people might actually live. The knock on the door came while they were debating whether the TV should go against the north or south wall. Lucas wasn't expecting visitors. Didn't know anyone in the building yet. For a moment, he considered not answering, some paranoid part of his divorce-traumatized brain imagining process servers or angry ex-in-laws bearing grievances. But he opened the door. The woman standing in the hallway looked to be in her early 40s, with auburn hair pulled back in a loose ponytail and smile lines around green eyes that suggested someone who laughed often, or at least used to. She wore yoga pants and an oversized cardigan and carried a covered dish that smelled like heaven. "Hi," she said, her voice warm and slightly apologetic. "I'm Claire Morgan from 3C, right next door. I hope I'm not interrupting." Lucas Reed. He shook her extended hand, aware that he probably looked like exactly what he was, a recently divorced man who'd been living out of boxes for 3 months. "And no, not interrupting. We're just, well, still figuring out where everything goes." Claire's smile deepened, genuine and kind. "I remember that feeling. We moved in 4 years ago, and I swear I was still finding boxes in closets 6 months later." She lifted the covered dish. "I made too much lasagna, which is a lie. I totally made this specifically to bring over, but too much lasagna sounds less intrusive than welcome wagon neighbor bringing you dinner." Lucas found himself smiling for the first time in hours. "Well, we were about to order pizza, so your timing is impeccable. Would you and your family like to join us?" "Oh, that's sweet, but my husband's working late. He's basically always working late, and my daughter's at a friend's house. This is really just a quick drop-off and hello." She handed him the dish. "There's reheating instructions on a card under the foil, and if you need anything, recommendations for takeout, where to find the best bodega, which subway entrance doesn't smell like a public bathroom, I'm in 3C. "Dad?" Jamie appeared at Lucas's elbow, curious about the visitor. "Hi there," Claire said, bending slightly to be at his eye level. "You must be Lucas's son. I'm Claire. I live next door." "Jamie," the boy said quietly, then added, "We're eating pizza." "Lucky," Claire said seriously. "I love pizza. What kind?" "We haven't ordered yet," Lucas interjected. "But thank you for this. Really, it's kind of you." Something flickered across Claire's face, a shadow of understanding, perhaps recognition of what a man unpacking boxes with his son on a Thursday evening really meant. But she just nodded. "Well, welcome to the building, Lucas. Jamie." She was halfway down the hall when she turned back. "Oh, and the walls are pretty thin, so if we ever bother you, just knock. We'll keep it down." After she left, Jamie looked up at his father with an expression of supreme skepticism. "Are we eating the lasagna or pizza?" "Both," Lucas declared. "We're out. We're celebrating. New apartment, new start. You can't celebrate with both. Watch me." They ended up eating the lasagna, which was exceptional, and saving the pizza for later. Jamie fell asleep around 10, exhausted from the emotional weight of the day, and Lucas tucked him in with the careful tenderness of a father who knew these moments were numbered. Soon Jamie would be too old for tucking in, too old for goodnight hugs, too old for needing Dad in quite the same way. Lucas stood in the doorway of Jamie's new room for a long moment, watching the rise and fall of his son's breathing, before finally retreating to his own bedroom. The apartment felt different at night. The sounds of the building became apparent. Footsteps from the floor above, the distant murmur of a television through the walls, the periodic groan of old pipes settling. Lucas lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and tried not to think about the house he'd left behind. The house where Jamie's room was down the hall, where breakfast was a shared experience every morning, where life felt whole instead of fractured into custody schedules and alternating weekends. His phone buzzed. A text from his ex-wife, Angela. "How's he doing?" Lucas typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on, "Good, room's set up. He seems okay." The reply came instantly. "Call if he needs anything." He wanted to respond with something sharp, something about how what Jamie needed was his parents to still be married, still be together, still be the unit they'd promised to be when he was born. But he just typed, "Will do." Sleep came eventually, fitful and dream-heavy, full of images of packing boxes and signing papers, and watching his life get divided into his and hers. The next morning, Friday, Lucas woke to find Jamie already awake, sitting at the kitchen counter eating cereal and watching videos on his tablet. Domestic normalcy, or the appearance of it. "Sleep okay?" Lucas asked, starting the coffee maker. "Mm-hmm." "Want to explore the neighborhood later? Find where everything is?" Jamie shrugged, which Lucas had learned to interpret as a yes that wanted to maintain the appearance of indifference. Preteen emotional complexity. He was going to have to navigate this for years. They spent the morning walking Brooklyn, mapping out their new territory. The bodega on the corner where the owner, Marcus, recognized newcomers immediately and made a point of learning their names. The library 3 blocks over with the children's section that Jamie pretended not to be interested in while absolutely being interested in. The park where kids played pickup basketball and dog owners congregated in judgmental clusters. Lucas bought bagels from a shop with a line out the door, always a good sign, and they ate them on a bench, watching the neighborhood move around them. "Think you'll like it here?" Lucas asked. Jamie considered this while chewing, a habit that drove Angela crazy, but that Lucas found endearing. "It's different. Different good or different bad? Just different." They were walking back to the apartment when Lucas saw Claire again, this time with her daughter. The girl looked to be in her late teens, 18 or 19 maybe, with her mother's auburn hair and a wary expression that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. "Lucas! Jamie!" Claire called out, genuine pleasure in her voice. "Perfect timing. This is my daughter Nina. Nina, these are our new neighbors." Nina glanced up from her phone long enough to offer a tight smile. "Hi." "Nice to meet you," Lucas said, noting the body language. Arms crossed, weight shifted away, the universal teenage signal of being held somewhere against your will. "Nina just finished her freshman year at Columbia," Claire said with unmistakable maternal pride. "Home for the summer." "That's great," Lucas said. "What are you studying?" "Psychology," Nina said flatly, then added with a hint of edge, "though I'm sure that's not actually that interesting." "Nina," Claire's voice carried a warning. "What? I'm sure they don't actually care about my major. They're just being polite." Nina looked directly at Lucas for the first time, and he was struck by how much older than 18 she seemed, something exhausted in those eyes, something already disappointed by the world. "Well, we should let you go," Claire said quickly, her smile strained. "Nina and I were just grabbing lunch. Say hi if you need anything, okay?" They walked away, and Lucas could hear the beginning of an argument starting even before they'd turned the corner, Claire's placating tone, Nina's sharp responses. "She seems mean," Jamie observed. "She seems unhappy," Lucas corrected gently. "There's a difference." That weekend passed in a blur of unpacking, organizing, and creating routines. Jamie seemed to relax incrementally, his natural resilience starting to emerge. They found their rhythm, breakfast together, activities during the day, dinner at the small kitchen table, movies before bed. For 48 hours, Lucas could almost pretend they were okay. Sunday evening came too quickly. Angela arrived at 6 to pick up Jamie, her presence in the apartment doorway creating an awkward triangle of former intimacy and current distance. "The place looks good," she said, not quite meeting Lucas's eyes. "Homey. Thanks." Jamie was quiet during the handoff, giving Lucas a hug that lasted just a moment too long before pulling away and grabbing his backpack. "See you next Friday," Lucas said, keeping his voice steady. "Bye, Dad." Then they were gone, and the apartment became exactly what Lucas had been dreading, a 700-square-foot monument to loneliness. He spent Sunday evening washing dishes that didn't need washing, organizing things that were already organized, and actively avoiding the silence that pressed in from all sides. Around 9, he heard voices from the hallway, Claire's apartment, the walls indeed thin enough to carry sound. "Never here anyway, so what difference does it make?" A male voice, authoritative and irritated. "I'm just saying that Nina needs—" Claire conciliatory. "Nina's an adult. She can figure it out." "She's 18, Richard. She's still— I don't have time for this. I have a call in 20 minutes. A door slammed. Silence. Then the muffled sound of someone crying. Whether Claire or Nina, Lucas couldn't tell. He turned the TV up, tried not to listen, tried not to think about how thin the walls were in more ways than one, tried not to recognize the sound of a marriage fraying at the edges, because he'd heard those sounds in his own house not so long ago. The weeks that followed established a pattern. Jamie on weekends, solitude during the week. Lucas threw himself into work. He was a freelance graphic designer, which meant he could work from home, which meant the apartment became both sanctuary and prison. He'd take his laptop to coffee shops just to be around other humans, to remember what ambient conversation sounded like. He saw Claire occasionally in the hallway, always with that warm smile that never quite reached her eyes anymore. They'd chat about nothing: the weather, the building's temperamental elevator, the new Italian place that had opened down the block. Surface-level neighbor friendship, the kind built on proximity rather than connection. Nina he saw less frequently. She moved through the building like a ghost, earbuds always in, eyes always somewhere else. Lucas would offer a polite nod, which she'd return with the bare minimum of acknowledgement before disappearing into 3C. Through the walls, Lucas learned the architecture of their family, Richard's booming voice during late-night business calls, Claire's patient attempts at conversation, always met with minimal response, Nina's music, sad indie stuff that leaked through at odd hours, suggesting insomnia or avoidance or both. And underneath it all, the silence. The heavy, pressing silence of people living in the same space while existing in separate worlds. Lucas recognized it intimately. It was the same silence that had filled his marriage in those final months before the lawyer's office. The mediator, the signatures that dissolved 15 years into a custody schedule and a property settlement. One Wednesday evening in late June, Lucas was coming back from a run. A new habit, something to fill the empty hours, when he found Claire sitting on the building's front steps. She had a glass of red wine in her hand and was staring at the street with the expression of someone who'd forgotten what they were looking for. "Hey," Lucas said, slowing to a walk. "You okay?" She looked up, and he saw that her eyes were red. Not crying exactly, but the aftermath. "Oh, hi, Lucas. Yeah, I'm fine. Just getting some air." He should have kept walking, should have offered a sympathetic smile and headed upstairs. But something in her posture, the defeated slope of her shoulders, the way she held that wine glass like a lifeline, stopped him. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. She gestured to the step beside her. "Free country." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the neighborhood transition from day to evening. A group of teenagers passed, laughing about something on someone's phone. An old woman walked by with a shopping cart full of groceries and what appeared to be a very small, very angry dog. 23 years, Claire said suddenly. Lucas waited. "We've been married for 23 years, together since college. I was 19 when we met." She took a sip of wine. "Do you know what it's like to be with someone for that long and realize you don't actually know them anymore?" "Yeah," Lucas said quietly. "I do." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe? The fellowship of the emotionally abandoned. "I'm sorry," she said. "I shouldn't be unloading on you. We barely know each other." "Sometimes that makes it easier," Lucas said. "No history to navigate around." Claire laughed, but it was a sad sound. "Richard got promoted again, VP of something or other. More travel, more responsibility, more everything except being here." She paused. "Nina starts at Columbia full-time in the fall. I asked him if maybe we could plan a trip, just the three of us, before she goes. He said he'd check his schedule. Like we're a dentist appointment he might be able to squeeze in." Lucas didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Sometimes silence was the kindest offering. "I used to think this was what success looked like," Claire continued. "The apartment, the career, the private school education. But Nina barely speaks to us anymore. She's home for the summer, and I see her less than when she was away at school. And Richard..." She trailed off, shook her head. "Sorry, you don't need to hear this." "It's okay," Lucas said. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. That sounds really hard." "Are you divorced?" The question was direct but not unkind. 93 days officially, 18 months practically. "Kids?" "One son, Jamie. He's 10, weekends and holidays." Claire nodded slowly. "That must be brutal." "Most days," Lucas admitted, "but we're figuring it out." They sat there as the sky darkened, two people orbiting their respective loneliness, until Claire's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, sighed, and stood up. "I should go. Nina's asking about dinner, which is progress, I guess. She usually just holes up in her room." She paused at the door. "Thanks for sitting with me, Lucas. I know it's weird, but it helped." "Anytime." After she went inside, Lucas sat on the steps for a while longer, thinking about marriage and loneliness and the ways people could share a space without really being together. Thinking about how sometimes the walls between apartments were thinner than the walls between people who'd promised to love each other forever. Summer progressed with the slow heat of New York in July. Lucas developed a routine: work during the day, runs in the evening, Jamie on weekends. Simple, manageable, almost sustainable. He started seeing Claire more regularly, usually in passing, but occasionally for longer conversations in the building's small courtyard or on the front steps. They'd talk about safe things mostly: books, movies, the news, carefully avoiding the deeper currents of their respective situations, but both aware they were there. Nina remained largely invisible until one Saturday morning when Lucas was leaving the building with Jamie, heading to the Natural History Museum. They'd made it to the front steps when Nina emerged from the building, looking startled to see other humans. "Oh, hey," she said. "Morning," Lucas replied. "Nina, this is my son Jamie. Jamie, this is our neighbor Nina." Jamie, who'd been instructed about politeness approximately 1,000 times, managed a smile. "Hi." Nina looked at Jamie like he was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. "How old are you?" 10 and a half. "You like the Mets?" She'd noticed his jersey. Jamie shrugged. "They're okay. My dad likes them." "They're terrible," Nina said, but she was almost smiling. "You should be a Yankees fan. Better team, better stadium, better everything." "The Yankees are corporate sellouts who represent everything wrong with modern baseball," Lucas said with mock seriousness. Nina's eyebrows rose. "That's a strong opinion about sports." "I contain multitudes." "Whitman. Nice." She adjusted her bag on her shoulder. "Where are you guys headed?" "Museum of Natural History," Jamie said, "to see the dinosaurs." "The dinosaurs are the best part," Nina said, and for a moment she looked like what she was, a teenager, not the world-weary adult she'd been performing as. "Have fun." She walked away, but Lucas noticed she was smiling slightly. A small victory for human connection. "She's not as mean as I thought," Jamie observed. "Told you." The museum was crowded but wonderful, and Jamie's enthusiasm for prehistoric creatures reminded Lucas why he loved being a father. They spent 4 hours wandering exhibits, eating overpriced cafeteria food, and debating whether T-Rex could actually roar or if it made sounds more like a giant pigeon. When they got back to the apartment, exhausted and happy, Claire was in the hallway struggling with grocery bags. "Let me help," Lucas said immediately, taking 2 bags before she could protest. "You're a lifesaver," Claire said. "I always buy more than I can carry and then refuse to make 2 trips on principle." Jamie grabbed a bag too, following them to 3C. Claire's apartment was similar to Lucas's in layout, but felt entirely different, lived in, established, full of the accumulated evidence of years. Photos on every surface. Nina growing from infant to teenager in frozen moments. Richard appeared in early photos but became gradually scarcer until the more recent pictures were just Claire and Nina, or Nina alone. "You can just put those on the counter," Claire said. "Thank you both so much." Nina emerged from her room, headphones around her neck. "Oh, hi again." "We ran into each other at the museum," Lucas explained. Nina was very definitive about the Yankees. "Because I'm right," Nina said, but she was smiling. She looked at Jamie. "Did you see the blue whale?" Jamie's eyes went wide. "There's a blue whale. Full-size model hanging from the ceiling. It's incredible." "We somehow missed that," Lucas admitted. "Critical error," Nina said seriously. "Grounds for a return visit." The ease of the interaction caught Lucas off guard. This was a different Nina than the sullen teenager from their first meeting. Maybe she was like this at home. Maybe the walls just made it seem like everyone was always unhappy. "Do you want to stay for dinner?" Claire asked suddenly. "I mean, I bought enough food to feed a small army apparently, and it's just going to be Nina and me. Richard's in Chicago this week." Lucas hesitated, aware of boundaries, of not wanting to intrude. But Jamie was looking at him hopefully, and Claire seemed genuine in the invitation. "If you're sure we're not imposing?" "Please," Claire said. "I'd love the company." They ended up having a surprisingly pleasant evening. Claire cooked pasta while Lucas made a salad, and the kids sat at the counter talking about movies and music and the merits of various dinosaurs. The apartment filled with the sounds of people actually enjoying each other's company, And for a few hours, Lucas could almost forget about custody schedules and divorce attorneys, and the weight of starting over at 44. After dinner, Jamie and Nina ended up on the couch playing some video game while Lucas helped Claire clean up. "Thank you for this," Claire said quietly, scraping plates. "Nina's been so withdrawn since she came home. It's nice to hear her laugh." "Jamie's having a great time too," Lucas said. "This is good for him. For both of us, honestly." Claire looked out at the living room where Nina was trash-talking Jamie's gaming skills with cheerful aggression. She used to be like this all the time, happy, open. Then high school happened and Richard got busier and she just folded in on herself. She paused. Her therapist says she's dealing with some depression. Not serious, but enough to worry about. "I'm sorry," Lucas said. "That's hard." "She won't talk to me about it, about anything, really. It's like living with a stranger who happens to share my DNA." Claire's voice was thick with frustration and sadness. "I don't know how to reach her anymore." Lucas wanted to say something helpful, something wise and comforting, but he was a divorced father who saw his son on weekends. He had no answers about parenting, about maintaining connection across the distances people created. "For what it's worth," he said finally, "she seemed really engaged tonight. Maybe she just needs, I don't know, different energy, new people." Claire nodded, but she didn't look convinced. They left around 9, Jamie full of pasta and happiness, already asking when they could hang out with Nina again. "She's cool," he declared in the elevator, "even if she's wrong about the Yankees." Lucas smiled, ruffled his son's hair, and felt a small warmth in his chest. Maybe they were building something here. Maybe this neighborhood, this building, these people could become part of their new normal. He had no idea how complicated that would become. The summer continued its slow burn into August. The weekend visits with Jamie took on new dimensions now that Nina had been added to their orbit. She'd appear sometimes when Lucas and Jamie were leaving for an activity, asking where they were headed, occasionally tagging along. It happened casually at first, running into each other in the hallway, Nina mentioning she was bored, Lucas saying they were going to get ice cream or see a movie. The invitation extended naturally. Jamie clearly enjoyed having an older kid around, and Nina seemed to come alive when she was with them, stepping out of whatever darkness she inhabited at home. Claire noticed and was grateful. "Thank you for including her," she said to Lucas one evening. "I think you're good for her, both of you. She actually smiles now." Lucas felt uncomfortable with the gratitude, like he was being credited for something that required no effort. "She's easy to be around," he said, "and Jamie loves having her there." What he didn't say, he'd started to look forward to those moments too. Nina was smart, funny when she let herself be, and had a way of seeing through social niceties to whatever was true underneath. She asked direct questions and expected honest answers. It was refreshing after years of marriage where every conversation had 17 layers of subtext. But she was 18, Claire's daughter, his neighbor's kid. The boundaries were clear, and Lucas was careful to maintain them. Except boundaries were harder to maintain than he'd anticipated, because loneliness had a way of finding cracks in even the strongest walls. It started small. Nina mentioning a book she was reading, Lucas recommending another one, actual conversations about literature and philosophy happening in the building's hallway, her asking about his work, seeming genuinely interested in the design projects he was working on, him asking about her classes, her plans for the fall, what she wanted to do with her psychology degree. They were just talking. Neighbors being friendly, completely innocent. But somewhere in those conversations, something shifted. Lucas couldn't pinpoint exactly when, couldn't identify the specific moment where friendly became something more complicated. Maybe it was the evening Nina knocked on his door asking to borrow a book, and they ended up talking for 2 hours while Jamie played video games. Maybe it was the afternoon she helped him pick out paint colors for Jamie's room, turning it into an absurd debate about the psychological implications of morning sky blue versus ocean mist. Maybe it was the way she looked at him sometimes, like he was something other than a middle-aged divorced man living in Brooklyn alone. Lucas told himself he was being paranoid, reading things that weren't there. Nina was just a lonely kid finding connection where she could, and he was a safe adult who listened. That's all it was. That's all it could be. August became September. Nina prepared to move back to campus for her sophomore year. Jamie went back to school, the weekends suddenly precious again, finite in a way they hadn't been over summer. Lucas assumed Nina's departure would reset everything to normal. She'd go back to Columbia, busy with classes and friends and the full life of a college student. The summer's casual friendship would fade naturally, remembered fondly but ultimately inconsequential. He was wrong. The weekend before Nina left for school, Claire threw a small goodbye dinner. Just the four of them. Claire, Richard, who'd actually managed to be present for once, Nina, and Lucas, who'd been invited as a kind of honorary neighbor friend. Richard turned out to be exactly what Lucas expected. Tall, commanding presence, expensive watch, the kind of handshake that asserted dominance. He talked almost exclusively about work, dropping names and deals and numbers with the casual arrogance of someone used to being the most important person in every room. Nina barely spoke to him. When Richard asked about her plans for the semester, her answers were monosyllabic. When he launched into advice about networking and internships, she stared at her plate like it contained the secrets of the universe. Claire tried to bridge the gap, asking questions, steering conversation toward neutral territory, performing the exhausting labor of keeping a family functional through forced cheerfulness. Lucas mostly stayed quiet, feeling like an anthropologist observing a species he'd once belonged to. The dynamics were painfully familiar. The husband who'd checked out emotionally years ago, the wife trying to hold everything together, the daughter caught between resentment and resignation. After dinner, Richard retreated to his study for calls, always more important than the people in front of him. Claire started cleaning up, and Nina disappeared to her room, leaving Lucas helping with dishes because it felt rude to just leave. "Thank you for coming," Claire said, scrubbing a plate with more force than necessary. "I know it was probably awkward." "Not at all," Lucas lied politely. "Richard tries," she said, though her tone suggested she didn't quite believe it. He doesn't know how to connect anymore, with either of us." Lucas dried a glass, said nothing. "Nina leaves tomorrow," Claire continued. "Part of me is relieved, honestly. The house has been so tense, but part of me is terrified. Once she's gone, it's just going to be me and Richard, and I don't know how to—" She stopped, shook her head. "Sorry. Again, I keep doing this to you." "It's okay," Lucas said. "Really?" They finished cleaning in silence, and Lucas said his goodbyes, heading back to his apartment with the weight of other people's sadness sitting heavy in his chest. He'd just settled onto his couch with a book when the knock came. Soft but insistent. Nina stood in the hallway, wearing sweatpants and an oversized Columbia hoodie, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked young suddenly, uncertain. "Hey," Lucas said, surprised. "Everything okay? Can I come in, just for a minute?" Every instinct told him to say no. To maintain the boundary. To suggest they talk in the hallway where anyone could see, where there was no possibility of misinterpretation. But he stepped aside and let her in. Nina walked to his living room window, looking out at the street below. "I leave tomorrow," she said. "I know. Your mom mentioned. You excited?" "I guess." She turned to face him. "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For this summer. For being—" She searched for the word. "Present, I guess. For actually seeing me instead of just looking through me." Lucas felt uncomfortable warmth in his chest, warning bells going off somewhere in the back of his mind. "Nina, I didn't do anything special. We just hung out sometimes." "It was more than that to me," she said quietly. "You're the first adult who's talked to me like I'm a real person in a really long time. My dad sees me as either an accomplishment to brag about or a problem to solve. My mom sees me as this fragile thing she needs to fix. But you—" She took a step closer. "You just see me. Nina, I know this sounds stupid. I know I'm just the neighbor's kid or whatever, but I wanted you to know that this summer mattered. You matter." She was standing too close now, and Lucas recognized the moment for what it was. A young woman testing boundaries, trying to figure out where she fit in the world, looking for validation from someone who'd been kind to her. He also recognized his responsibility to shut this down, firmly but gently, to be the adult in the room. "I'm really glad we got to know each other this summer," Lucas said carefully, taking a deliberate step back. "You're a great kid, Nina. You're going to do amazing things at Columbia, and I'm sure you'll make tons of friends who actually see you for who you are." The rejection was subtle but clear. Nina's face shifted, embarrassment flooding in, and she wrapped her arms around herself. Right, yeah, of course. She moved toward the door quickly. I should go. Early morning tomorrow. Nina, wait. But she was already in the hallway, disappearing into 3C before he could say anything else. Lucas stood in his doorway, heart pounding, feeling like he'd just navigated something dangerous without quite understanding what it was. He closed the door, locked it, and told himself it was fine, that he'd handled it correctly, that the weird tension was just his imagination, his loneliness making him read too much into a simple thank you from a kid who'd had a rough summer. But that night, lying in bed, he couldn't shake the image of Nina's face in that moment before she left, the hope and vulnerability and something else he didn't want to name. He thought about Claire next door, trying to hold together a marriage that had died years ago. He thought about Richard, living in the same apartment as his family while existing in a completely different world. He thought about Nina, trapped between childhood and adulthood, looking for someone to tell her she mattered. And he thought about himself, 44 years old, divorced, seeing his son on weekends, living alone in a building full of people who were all alone in their own ways. The walls were thin. He could hear Claire watching television next door, could hear the murmur of voices as she and Richard had some conversation he couldn't make out, could hear Nina in her room, music playing low, maybe crying, or maybe just packing for tomorrow. Everyone separate, everyone together, everyone desperately lonely in a building full of people who should be able to reach each other but couldn't quite bridge the gap. Lucas fell asleep eventually and dreamed of walls that were too thin and boundaries that were too fragile and distances that couldn't be crossed no matter how badly anyone wanted to try. He had no idea that was only the beginning, that the summer had planted seeds that would take years to grow, that the moment in his apartment with Nina wasn't an ending but a pause, a deep breath before something much more complicated. The city settled into the rhythm of early September, cooler nights, and the smell of autumn just beginning to hint at its arrival. Nina went back to Columbia. Jamie started 5th grade. Claire continued her careful performance of contentment. Richard continued to be mostly absent, and Lucas continued trying to build a life from the pieces of the one that had broken, unaware that some boundaries only hold until someone needs them not to. The emptiness of the apartment was louder now, somehow, like the brief fullness of summer had made the silence more obvious by contrast. Lucas worked, ran, counted down to Friday afternoons when Jamie would arrive with his backpack and his video games and his uncomplicated need for his father. It should have been enough. Some days it was. But other days, Lucas stood at his window looking out at Brooklyn spreading in all directions. Millions of people all trying to figure out how to connect with each other, how to be less alone, how to matter to someone. He didn't know that across the hallway, Nina was thinking the same thing. He didn't know that loneliness could be patient. He didn't know that some stories don't start when you think they do. They start long before, in quiet moments and brief conversations and summer afternoons that seemed inconsequential until suddenly they weren't. The first part of the story was over. The second part was still years away. But in a building with thin walls and people living separate lives in close quarters, sometimes the most important thing to understand was this: proximity isn't the same as distance, and being alone in a crowd is the loneliest feeling of all. Lucas turned away from the window and went back to his empty apartment, unaware that he'd just lived through the prologue. The real story hadn't even begun yet. 3 years passed like pages turning in a book. Lucas forgot he was reading. Jamie grew from 10 to 13, all gangly limbs and voice cracks and sudden opinions about everything. The weekend visits continued their reliable rhythm: Friday pickups, Sunday drop-offs, the careful choreography of shared custody that had become muscle memory. Lucas's apartment filled with the accumulated debris of those years: video game controllers, basketball shoes in increasingly large sizes, posters of bands Lucas had never heard of taped to Jamie's bedroom walls. Work expanded to fill the empty spaces. Lucas took on bigger clients, better projects, built a reputation solid enough that he could be selective. The freelance isolation became comfortable, almost preferable to the alternative of office politics and forced sociability. He dated occasionally. A woman from a coffee shop, a setup from a well-meaning friend, a brief thing with someone he met at Jamie's basketball game. Nothing stuck. Nothing felt worth the effort of excavating his heart from the protective shell it had grown over 3 years of careful solitude. Claire remained a steady presence next door, their friendship deepening in the way of people who shared proximity and understood each other's damage without needing to discuss it explicitly. They'd have dinner sometimes, the two of them, talking about books and movies and everything except what really mattered. She never mentioned her marriage directly, but Lucas could track its deterioration through the walls. Fewer conversations, longer silences, Richard's voice becoming increasingly rare until it seemed like he'd stopped coming home at all. Nina was mostly absent from this equation. She'd come home for holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, spring break, but those visits were brief and she was always busy with friends, with internships, with the consuming momentum of college life. Lucas would see her occasionally in the hallway, offer a wave and a "How's school?" that she'd answer politely before disappearing into 3C. The weird tension from that last night before she left for sophomore year had faded into something Lucas convinced himself he'd imagined. She was just a kid. He was just a lonely neighbor. That moment had meant nothing. Except sometimes, very occasionally, he'd catch her looking at him in a way that suggested she remembered it differently. But those moments were rare enough that Lucas could dismiss them, file them under things that don't matter, and move on with the careful, controlled life he'd built from the wreckage of his divorce. Then Nina graduated from Columbia. Lucas learned about it from Claire, who knocked on his door on a Saturday morning in May, with invitation in hand and hope in her eyes. "I know it's presumptuous," Claire said, standing in his doorway in yoga pants and an oversized cardigan that had probably been expensive once, but now just looked tired. "But Nina specifically asked if you and Jamie would come to her graduation. I think she'd really like to have you there." Lucas felt something uncomfortable shift in his chest. "Claire, that's a family thing. We'd be intruding." "Please," Claire said, and there was something desperate in her voice. "Richard can't make it. Some conference he can't miss, which is exactly the kind of thing that—" She stopped, shook her head. Nina was so disappointed when he said no. Having you there would mean a lot to her, to both of us. So Lucas said yes, because saying no felt crueler than whatever awkwardness might come from attending. The graduation was at Columbia's main campus, thousands of students in blue robes flooding the quad, families everywhere with cameras and flowers, and the particular joy that comes from watching someone you love accomplish something significant. Lucas and Jamie sat with Claire in the crowded bleachers, scanning the sea of graduates for Nina's face. When they finally spotted her, walking across the stage to receive her diploma, Claire grabbed Lucas's hand and squeezed hard enough to hurt. He let her, understanding that grip for what it was, a mother watching her daughter reach adulthood while her husband was in Dallas or Denver or wherever the hell his conference was, choosing work over this moment for the 1,000th time. After the ceremony, they found Nina in the crowd, surrounded by friends but somehow still looking alone. When she saw them, her face transformed, genuine happiness breaking through whatever mask she'd been wearing. "You came," she said, pulling Claire into a hug, then Jamie, then, after a moment's hesitation, Lucas. The hug lasted just slightly too long. Lucas felt it in the way she held on, the way her breath caught slightly before she pulled away. He stepped back quickly, smiled, said all the appropriate congratulatory things. "We're so proud of you," Claire said, tears streaming freely now. "I'm sorry Dad couldn't—" "It's fine," Nina cut her off, voice sharp. Then softer. "I'm glad you're here. All of you." They went to lunch at a restaurant Nina had picked, somewhere trendy in the village where the portions were small and the prices were absurd. Nina's friends had invited her to various parties, but she'd chosen this instead, lunch with her mother's neighbor, and that neighbor's teenage son. Lucas found that choice both touching and concerning in ways he couldn't quite articulate. Over overpriced pasta, Nina talked about her plans. She'd been accepted to Columbia's psychology PhD program, would be starting in the fall. Research focused on attachment theory and family systems. She spoke with the particular intensity of someone who'd found their calling, and Lucas found himself genuinely impressed. "That's incredible," he said. "PhD at 22. That's remarkable." Nina looked at him directly for the first time since they'd sat down. "I had good role models," she said. "People who showed me that being smart and curious was worth something." The statement hung in the air, weighted with meaning that Claire seemed to miss entirely, but that made Lucas deeply uncomfortable. Jamie, oblivious to subtext, asked about Columbia's campus, whether they had good basketball courts, if the food was actually as bad as everyone said. Nina answered his questions with real attention, and watching them interact, Lucas could almost convince himself that everything was normal, that she was just the kid next door who'd grown up, that whatever he was sensing was his own projection, his own loneliness creating narratives that didn't exist. They parted ways after lunch, Nina heading off to meet friends, promising to see Claire later. As they walked back to the subway, Jamie chattering about wanting to go to Columbia someday, Claire linked her arm through Lucas's. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for being here, for being part of our lives. I don't know what I'd do without you." Lucas felt the weight of that gratitude like an anchor. He'd become essential to this family somehow, filling in the gaps left by Richard's absence. It was a role he'd never asked for but had gradually assumed through proximity and kindness and being available when availability was what they needed most. He wondered, not for the first time, if he was helping or just enabling them to avoid dealing with the real problem. Summer arrived with the kind of heat that made Brooklyn feel like a fever dream. Lucas and Jamie fell into their usual rhythm, but something felt different this year. Jamie was 13 now, asserting independence, wanting to spend time with his friends more than his dad. The weekends that had once been entirely theirs became negotiated territories. A few hours here, an afternoon there, Lucas learning to share his son with the world that was pulling him toward adulthood. Nina was home for the summer before her PhD program started, and unlike previous years, she didn't seem busy with friends or internships. She was just there, in the building, around. Lucas would run into her constantly, at the bodega, in the building's courtyard, on the front steps, always with that same direct way of looking at him, always with conversations that went deeper than neighbor small talk should go. "How are you really doing?" she asked him one evening when they'd both ended up on the building's roof deck, her with a book and him with his laptop, trying to work somewhere other than his apartment. "Fine," Lucas said automatically. "Work's good, Jamie's good. Can't complain?" "That's not what I asked." Nina set her book down, something dense about cognitive behavioral therapy. "I asked how you're doing." Lucas looked at her, this 22-year-old who somehow saw through every deflection and felt something crack in his carefully maintained composure. "Honestly, I'm lonely," he heard himself say. "Not all the time, but enough that it's noticeable. I love Jamie, love our weekends, but the rest of the week is just empty. And I'm fine with that, mostly. I've made peace with it. But yeah, lonely." Nina nodded like this confirmed something she'd already suspected. "I get that. I feel lonely all the time, even when I'm around people. Especially when I'm around people, actually." "Why?" Lucas asked, genuinely curious. "Because nobody really knows me," she said simply. "They know the version I show them, the good student, the accomplished daughter, whatever. But the actual me?" She shrugged. "I keep her pretty locked down." "Why?" "Because the last time I showed someone the real me, they stepped back like I'd pulled a knife." The words were said lightly, but Lucas heard the hurt underneath. He knew she was talking about that night 3 years ago, the almost moment in his apartment before she left for sophomore year. The knowledge sat between them like a living thing. "Nina," he started, but she cut him off. "It's okay. You were right to do that. I was 18 and confused, and you were the first man who'd been kind to me in forever. I misread things." She met his eyes. "But I'm not 18 anymore." The implication was clear enough that Lucas felt his pulse quicken. This was dangerous territory. This was exactly the kind of conversation he should shut down immediately. "You're still my neighbor's daughter," he said carefully. "Still Claire's kid. That hasn't changed. I'm also an adult who gets to decide who she wants in her life." "Nina." "Relax," she said, but she was smiling slightly. "I'm not asking you for anything. I'm just saying that sometimes loneliness recognizes loneliness. And it's nice to talk to someone who doesn't pretend everything's fine when it isn't." Lucas knew he should leave, should pack up his laptop, say goodnight, establish clear boundaries. Instead, he stayed, and they talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing. Her research, his work, books they'd read, places they wanted to travel, the particular isolation of living in a city of millions. When he finally went back to his apartment, he felt both lighter and more troubled than he had in months. Over the next few weeks, it became a pattern. They'd run into each other, start talking, and hours would disappear. Sometimes Jamie was there, turning it into something that felt safer, more appropriate. But increasingly, it was just the two of them, conversations that went deeper than Lucas had with anyone else in his life. Nina told him about her research, about trying to understand why people attach to the wrong things, why families fracture, why some people could be in the same room and still be completely unreachable to each other. "Like my parents," she said one afternoon. They were at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the apartment, ostensibly both working but really just talking. They've been married for 26 years, they live in the same apartment, but they're strangers. My dad doesn't even really see my mom anymore. She's just furniture to him. Something that's always there so he doesn't have to think about it. "That's harsh," Lucas said. "It's true, though." Nina stirred her coffee absently. "And my mom just takes it. She makes excuses for him, pretends it's fine, acts like being ignored is normal. I used to beg her to leave him. Now I just feel sorry for her." Lucas thought about Claire, about the weight of her gratitude, about how she'd built her entire identity around a marriage that had died years ago. "It's complicated," he said. "Marriage, especially long ones. Sometimes people stay because leaving feels harder than staying, even when staying is killing them slowly." "Is that why you got divorced?" Nina asked. "Because leaving was easier than staying?" "Leaving was the hardest thing I've ever done," Lucas said honestly. "But yeah, staying would have been worse, for me, for Angela, definitely for Jamie. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is admit something's broken and stop pretending you can fix it." Nina looked at him with something that might have been admiration or might have been something more complicated. "You're the only person who talks to me like this. Like I can handle real answers. You're getting a PhD in psychology. I assume you can handle complexity." "Most people don't care about my PhD. They care about what I look like, or what they think I can do for them, or whatever narrative they've built about who I'm supposed to be." She paused. "You just care about what I actually think, what I actually am." Lucas felt the conversation tilting toward dangerous again. "Nina, I care about you the way I care about Claire. You're my neighbors, my friends." "Right. Friends." Something flickered across her face. Disappointment, maybe, or resignation. "Of course." She changed the subject after that, steering toward safer topics. But the moment stayed with Lucas. The awareness that something was building here, something he needed to address before it became unmanageable. He should have talked to Claire, should have created distance, should have recognized that his loneliness and Nina's were a volatile combination. Instead, he told himself it was fine, that he was handling it, that as long as nothing actually happened, they could maintain this friendship that felt increasingly less like friendship every time they talked. July became August. Jamie went to sleepaway camp for 2 weeks, something Angela had arranged, time with his friends, normal teenage stuff. Lucas supported it even though it meant 2 weekends alone, even though it felt like another step in the inevitable process of his son needing him less. The apartment felt especially empty with Jamie gone. Lucas threw himself into work, but the projects that usually consumed him felt hollow. He'd finish a design and realize he had no one to show it to, no one who cared whether he'd nailed the color palette or solved the layout problem. Nina knocked on his door on a Tuesday evening, holding takeout containers and a bottle of wine. "Mom's visiting her sister in Connecticut," she said. "Dad's God knows where. I was about to eat sad Chinese food alone in my apartment, and I thought, why do that when I could have company?" Every alarm bell in Lucas's head went off simultaneously. This was exactly the situation he should avoid. Nina, alone, in his apartment, with wine and the particular vulnerability that came from being abandoned by her parents yet again. "I don't think that's a good idea," he said. "Why not?" Nina's face was carefully neutral. "We're friends. Friends have dinner." "Nina, I'm not going to throw myself at you, if that's what you're worried about." The words were sharp, defensive. "I'm just lonely, and I thought you might be too, but if that's too complicated for you, I'll go." She turned to leave, and Lucas felt something in him break. The careful boundaries, the protective distance, the armor he'd built around his loneliness, All of it cracked wide open, because the truth was he was lonely, desperately lonely. And here was someone offering connection, and he wanted it badly enough to ignore every warning sign. "Wait," he said. "I'm sorry. Come in." They ate Chinese food at his small dining table, drank wine, talked about everything except what they were actually doing. Nina told stories about her undergrad years, about terrible dates and worse roommates and professors who changed her worldview. Lucas talked about his marriage, about the slow dissolution of something he thought was permanent, about learning to be a single father when he'd never planned to be a father alone. The conversation felt natural, easy, like they'd been doing this for years instead of walking a tightrope neither of them acknowledged. "Can I ask you something?" Nina said eventually. They'd moved to the couch, the wine bottle mostly empty, the summer heat making the apartment feel close and intimate. "Sure. Do you ever wish you could just start over? Not fix what's broken, but completely restart? Different choices, different life?" Lucas considered this. "Sometimes, but then I think about Jamie, and I can't wish away any choice that led to him existing. So no. I'd make different choices going forward maybe, but I wouldn't erase the past. Even the painful parts, especially the painful parts, they're what made me who I am." Nina looked at him with those two old eyes, seeing more than he wanted to show. "You're a good person, Lucas. I hope you know that." "I'm really not," he said quietly. "I'm just trying my best and hoping it's enough." "That's what makes you good." She shifted slightly closer, and Lucas became acutely aware of proximity, of heat, of the way loneliness could feel like chemistry if you weren't careful. "I should probably head back," Nina said, but she didn't move. "Probably," Lucas agreed, but he didn't move either. They sat there in the almost dark, the city's ambient light filtering through his windows, and Lucas felt the moment stretching like a rubber band pulled too tight. One of them needed to break it. One of them needed to be the adult and end this before it became something neither of them could take back. "Nina," he started. "I know," she said softly. "I should go." This time she actually stood up, gathered her things, moved toward the door. Lucas walked her there, the careful distance reasserted, the boundaries back in place even if they felt more fragile than before. "Thank you for dinner," he said. "Thank you for not making me eat alone." She paused at the threshold. "Lucas, I meant what I said. You're a good person. Don't forget that." After she left, Lucas stood in his empty apartment and felt the weight of something shifting. The summer suddenly felt different, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. He'd crossed no lines, done nothing wrong, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at the edge of something that would change everything. The rest of August passed in a blur of careful avoidance and inevitable collision. Lucas tried to create distance, but the building was too small and Nina too persistent. They'd run into each other and the conversations would start again, pulling them back into that dangerous intimacy where loneliness met understanding and created something neither of them knew how to name. Claire remained oblivious, grateful for Lucas's friendship, happy that Nina seemed happier this summer. She mentioned once that Nina talked about Lucas with real affection, that she was glad her daughter had a positive male role model since Richard was essentially absent. Lucas felt sick at those words, knowing that what was happening between him and Nina had long since stopped being about role models or healthy boundaries. Jamie came back from camp full of stories and new inside jokes Lucas didn't understand. His son was pulling away, becoming his own person, needing his father less with each passing day. Lucas was proud and heartbroken in equal measure. The last weekend of August, Jamie went back to his mother's early, some friend's birthday party he'd been invited to, teenage social life taking precedence over custody schedules. Angela picked him up Saturday afternoon instead of Sunday evening, and Lucas found himself alone with an entire weekend stretching ahead like a desert. He knew Nina was home, knew Claire had gone to Connecticut again, visiting her sister for a long weekend. Knew Richard was in Los Angeles or San Francisco or somewhere that wasn't Brooklyn. He knew he should stay in his apartment, should avoid the situation entirely. Instead, at 7 o'clock on Saturday evening, he knocked on the door of 3C. Nina answered, wearing sweatpants and an old t-shirt, her hair in a messy bun, no makeup, looking younger and more vulnerable than she had all summer. "Hey," she said, surprise and something else flickering across her face. "I was thinking of ordering Thai food. Lucas said, the lie coming easily. Wanted to see if you had recommendations. Nina smiled slightly, seeing right through him. The place on Amsterdam is good. They have decent pad thai. Want to come over? Share an order? It was the worst possible decision. They both knew it. The apartment empty, the building quiet. No Jamie to serve as buffer, no Claire to anchor them to reality. Nina should have said no. Lucas should have retracted the invitation. Instead, she said, "Give me 5 minutes to change," and disappeared into her apartment. They ordered too much food, opened another bottle of wine, and talked for hours about everything except what was really happening. The conversation flowed like water, easy and inevitable, covering books and movies and philosophy and psychology and all the ways people damaged each other while trying to love. My dissertation is going to be about attachment in broken families, Nina said at some point. They were on the couch again, that dangerous configuration, closer than they should be, but not quite touching. How children form bonds with whoever's emotionally available, even when those bonds are inappropriate. Sounds personal, Lucas observed. Everything's personal if you dig deep enough. She looked at him directly. You know what I realized? The only person who's ever really seen me, really understood me, is you. And that's so fucked up because you're 22 years older than me, and you're my neighbor, and you don't even want this. Nina, I'm not saying this to pressure you, I'm just naming it, because I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of acting like we're just friends when every time I'm around you, I feel more alive than I do anywhere else. I'm tired of this. She gestured between them. Whatever this is, Lucas felt his heart hammering. This was the moment to shut it down, to be the adult, to protect them both. You're right, he said quietly. This isn't just friendship, not for me either. But Nina, that doesn't mean we can act on it. You're Claire's daughter. You're 22. I'm 47. There's no version of this that isn't wrong. Why? The question was simple but loaded. Because society says so? Because there's an age gap? Because my mom would be hurt? She shifted closer, close enough that he could smell her shampoo. I'm an adult, Lucas. I get to decide what I want. And I want... Don't, Lucas interrupted. Please don't finish that sentence. Why not? Because if you say it out loud, I don't know if I'll be strong enough to do the right thing. The admission hung between them, dangerous and honest. Nina's eyes widened slightly, hope and heat flooding her face. Then don't do the right thing, she whispered. For once, just let yourself feel... Lucas stood up abruptly, putting physical distance between them. His hands were shaking. You need to go. Lucas. Now, Nina, please. She stood slowly, hurt and confusion warring on her face. I don't understand. If you feel it too, why? Because I'm the adult, Lucas said, and his voice came out harsher than he intended. Because you deserve someone your own age who isn't your mother's friend. Because this, he gestured between them, would destroy Claire, would destroy your relationship with your family, would make me the kind of man I swore I'd never be. You already are someone different than you think, Nina said quietly. You're someone who makes me feel seen and valued and understood. That's not wrong. It is when it turns into this. Lucas ran his hands through his hair, exhausted and desperate. Nina, I care about you. I do. But this can't happen. You have to go. She gathered her things in silence, moved toward the door with wounded dignity. But at the threshold, she turned back. You're wrong about one thing, she said. You're not doing this to protect me. You're doing it to protect yourself. Because you're scared of feeling something real after years of being safe and lonely. And that's fine. That's your choice. But don't pretend it's noble. Then she was gone, and Lucas was alone in his apartment with the wreckage of what might have been and the knowledge that he'd done the right thing for all the wrong reasons. He didn't sleep that night. Lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Nina through the walls, the sound of her crying, muffled but unmistakable. Every instinct told him to go to her, to comfort her, to apologize for hurting her. But comfort was what had led them here. Comfort was the dangerous thing. So he stayed in his bed and listened to her pain and hated himself for causing it, while knowing he'd do the same thing again. Summer ended. Nina left for her PhD program, barely speaking to him in those final days. Claire thanked him for being such a good friend to both of them, completely unaware of how close everything had come to exploding. Jamie started 8th grade. Lucas buried himself in work. Life continued its careful rhythm, loneliness and routine in equal measure. But something had shifted. Lucas couldn't unsee it now. The way loneliness could make you rationalize anything. The way need could dress itself up as connection. The way the wrong person at the wrong time could feel so perfectly right that you almost destroyed everything for the illusion. He'd held the boundary. Barely. By the thinnest possible margin. But holding it once didn't mean it would hold again. And somewhere in Manhattan, Nina was learning the same lesson. That some wants don't disappear just because they're impossible. They just go underground, waiting for the next moment of weakness, the next opportunity, the next time loneliness got too heavy to carry alone. The story wasn't over. It was just waiting. 2 years passed in the careful choreography of avoidance and forced normalcy. Nina came home for holidays but stayed with friends when she could, her visits to 3C brief and strategically timed to avoid crossing paths with Lucas in the hallway. When they did encounter each other, at Claire's Thanksgiving dinner, passing in the building's lobby, that one awkward moment in the elevator, they performed politeness with the precision of actors who'd rehearsed their roles too many times. Claire noticed nothing. Or if she did, she attributed it to Nina's increasing independence, her busy academic life, the natural drift that happened when children became adults with their own worlds to inhabit. She'd mentioned to Lucas over their occasional dinners that Nina seemed distant, preoccupied, but always with the resigned acceptance of a mother watching her daughter outgrow her. Lucas threw himself into being present for Jamie, who at 15 was now fully entrenched in teenage complexity, varsity basketball, a girlfriend who lasted 3 months before dramatic dissolution, grades that fluctuated based on interest level rather than ability. The weekend custody arrangement continued its reliable rhythm, though Jamie increasingly requested modifications, asking to stay at mom's for this tournament or that party, the natural pull of a social life that didn't fit neatly into a court-mandated schedule. Richard finally moved out of 3C in the spring of that first year. No drama, no announcement, just the gradual absence of his belongings until one day, Claire mentioned casually that he'd taken an apartment in Manhattan, closer to work, that they were separating formally. She said it the way someone might mention changing brands of coffee, a fact to be noted rather than grieved. "Are you okay?" Lucas had asked, sitting across from her at the small Italian place they'd started frequenting for these conversations about everything and nothing. "I've been not okay for so long that actual separation feels like relief," Claire said, swirling wine in her glass. "At least now I don't have to pretend. Don't have to keep performing the happy marriage for Nina's benefit when she saw through it years ago anyway." "What happens now?" "Divorce, eventually. He's not fighting it. We'll split everything down the middle like civilized people who stopped loving each other so long ago we can't remember what loving each other felt like." She paused. "Is that what it was like with you and Angela?" "Similar," Lucas admitted. "Except we had more anger. You and Richard just seem tired." "We are. 27 years of tired." Claire looked at him with something fragile in her eyes. "Do you ever regret it? Getting divorced?" Lucas thought about this honestly. "I regret that Jamie had to go through it. I regret that we couldn't figure out how to love each other better. But no, I don't regret leaving. Staying would have been worse for everyone." "Nina says the same thing, that I should have left years ago, that watching us pretend damaged her more than divorce would have." Claire's voice caught slightly. "She's probably right. She usually is." They didn't talk about Nina much after that. The topic felt charged in ways Lucas couldn't fully explain, so he steered conversations elsewhere, and Claire seemed content to let him. Work flourished. Lucas landed a major contract with a tech startup, the kind of project that required real creative energy and paid well enough that he could finally stop worrying about money. He moved through his days with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to be content with a small, controlled life. Work, Jamie, occasional dinners with Claire, runs through Prospect Park, the comfortable isolation of a man who'd made peace with being alone. Except he hadn't really made peace with it. He'd just gotten better at ignoring the wait. Jamie turned 16 that summer and got his driver's license, a milestone that felt both celebratory and devastating. His son could drive now, could navigate the world independently, Needed his father for transportation exactly never. Lucas bought him a used Honda, watched him drive away that first time, and felt the particular ache of obsolescence that came with parenting teenagers. He'll always need you, Claire said when Lucas mentioned this over dinner. Just in different ways. I know, doesn't make it easier. Nothing about parenting is easy. We just get better at hiding how terrified we are. It was late October when Nina came home unexpectedly, mid-semester, no warning. Lucas learned about it from the raised voices penetrating the wall between their apartments. Nina and Claire arguing with an intensity that made him turn up his television and try unsuccessfully not to listen. Can't just keep running away from everything, Claire's voice, sharp with frustration. I'm not running. I'm trying to survive. Nina, matching her mother's energy. But you wouldn't understand that because you spent 27 years being a doormat. That's not fair. It's completely fair. You let Dad treat you like furniture for decades and now you want to lecture me about my choices? Your choices are destroying you. Look at yourself, Nina. You're not sleeping. You're not eating. You're having panic attacks in the middle of the night. I'm fine. You're not fine, and I'm your mother. I get to worry. The argument continued, words becoming less distinct, but emotions crystallizing through the wall. Fear, anger, desperation. The particular pain of people who loved each other but couldn't figure out how to help. Lucas wanted to intervene somehow, but knew it wasn't his place. They were neighbors, friends, but this was family business. He had no right to insert himself into their crisis. Except around midnight, the knock came on his door. He knew who it would be before he opened it. Nina stood in the hallway, looking like she'd aged 5 years in the 2 since he'd last really looked at her. 24 now, but something haunted around her eyes, something depleted in the way she held herself. She wore an oversized sweater and leggings, hair pulled back messily, and Lucas could see she'd been crying. Can I come in? Her voice was raw. Just for a minute. I can't be in that apartment right now. Every instinct screamed that this was a terrible idea, that letting her in would restart something they'd barely managed to stop last time, that the smart thing, the right thing, was to suggest they talk in the hallway or offer to call Claire or literally any option except bringing her into his private space when she was this vulnerable. But he stepped aside because the truth was he'd never been able to say no to her when she looked like the world was crushing her. Nina walked directly to his couch and collapsed onto it like a puppet with cut strings. Lucas stayed standing, maintaining physical distance, trying to establish some boundary, even as he broke the most important one by letting her in at all. What happened? He asked. My dissertation advisor resigned. Just quit academia entirely, moved to Oregon or Montana or somewhere without warning. 2 years of research, all this work built on his framework, and now I have to either start over with someone new, who might have completely different ideas, or try to salvage it somehow. She laughed bitterly. And my mom thinks I'm having a breakdown, but really I'm just realizing that I built everything on a foundation that disappeared. Lucas recognized the metaphor for what it was, not just about her research. I'm sorry, he said carefully. That sounds incredibly difficult. The program director suggested I take a semester off, get my mental health sorted out, come back fresh. Nina looked up at him. But I can't go back to that apartment. Can't spend months with my mom trying to fix me when she can't even fix herself. I don't know what to do. What do you want to do? I want to disappear. I want to stop feeling like I'm failing at everything. I want... She stopped, shook her head. It doesn't matter what I want. Lucas sat down in the chair across from her, deliberately choosing something other than the couch. It matters, he said quietly. Your wants matter, Nina, even when they're complicated. She looked at him with those 2 old eyes, and Lucas saw everything he'd been avoiding for 2 years reflected back. The loneliness, the need, the particular desperation of someone who'd spent years trying to be strong and was finally out of strength. I missed you, Nina said simply. That's pathetic, right? Missing someone who was never actually mine to miss? But I did. Every day for 2 years I missed talking to you. Nina, let me finish. She held up a hand. I'm not asking you for anything. I learned that lesson. I know you don't want this, don't want me. I just needed you to know that you weren't wrong about what you said that night, about me using you to avoid dealing with my actual problems. You were completely right. I never said that. You didn't have to. I'm getting a PhD in psychology. I can recognize avoidant attachment when I'm living it. She smiled sadly. Turns out when your father is emotionally absent your whole life, you learn to seek validation from unavailable men. Textbook, really. My therapist had a field day with it. Lucas felt something crack in his chest. You're in therapy? Have been for a year, trying to figure out why I keep choosing people who can't actually be there for me. She met his eyes. Present company included. I never meant to hurt you. I know. That's what makes it worse somehow. You were trying to do the right thing, and it still felt like rejection. But that's my damage, not yours. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 2 years of unsaid things pressing down on them both. For what it's worth, Lucas said finally, I missed you too. Our conversations, the way you see things. You were right that night. I was protecting myself. I was scared of feeling something real. Was? Nina's voice was careful. Lucas should have corrected the tense, should have maintained the pastness of the feeling. Instead, he just looked at her and let the truth sit between them, dangerous and undeniable. You should probably go, he said softly. Yeah, but she didn't move. Lucas, can I ask you something? Sure. If things were different, if I was older, if we'd met some other way, if my mom wasn't your friend, do you think we could have worked? The question was hypothetical, but felt urgent, like her entire sense of self hinged on his answer. I think, Lucas said carefully, that in another universe where none of those things were true, we'd probably be really good together. You challenge me, you make me think. You see parts of me I usually keep hidden, but that universe isn't this one. Nina nodded slowly, absorbing this. Thank you for saying that. It helps somehow. Knowing it's not that I'm fundamentally unlovable or whatever, just that the circumstances are impossible. You're not unlovable, Nina. You're extraordinary. Some guy your own age is going to be incredibly lucky someday. I don't want some guy my own age. The words came out sharp, frustrated. I want someone who actually understands complexity, who doesn't think deep conversations are pretentious, who sees me as more than just... She stopped, stood abruptly. I should go. This was a mistake. Nina, wait. No, you're right. I keep doing this, keep putting you in impossible positions. It's not fair to you. She moved toward the door quickly. I'm sorry for all of it. I'll stay out of your way while I'm home. Lucas walked her to the door, every nerve aware of her proximity, of how easy it would be to reach out and pull her back, to stop performing restraint and just let himself feel what he'd been denying for years. At the threshold, Nina turned back one more time. The worst part, she said quietly, is that you're right about all of it, about why we can't do this. And I hate that you're right. I hate that being mature means accepting that sometimes the thing you want most is the thing that would hurt everyone. Then she was gone, the door closing behind her with a finality that felt heavier this time. Lucas stood in his empty apartment, heart racing, hands shaking slightly, and recognized how close he'd come to catastrophe. Another 5 minutes, another moment of weakness, and he would have crossed the line he'd been defending for years. He poured himself a drink he didn't want, sat on the couch where Nina had been sitting, and tried not to think about the imprint her body had left in the cushions, or the lingering scent of her shampoo, or the way she'd looked at him like he was something precious and devastating in equal measure. Through the wall, he could hear Nina and Claire talking, voices calmer now. Couldn't make out words, but heard the cadence of reconciliation, of mother and daughter finding their way back to each other after the storm. Lucas finished his drink, poured another, and made a decision. He would avoid Nina completely while she was home, would find excuses to be elsewhere, would create the distance she said she'd maintain. It was the only way to protect them both from the inevitable collision that would come if they spent any more time together. The decision lasted exactly 4 days. Claire knocked on his door on Sunday afternoon, cheerful and oblivious, asking if he wanted to join them for dinner. Nina had insisted she invite him, apparently. Said it would be good to have another person there to dilute the mother-daughter intensity. Lucas should have declined. Made up a work deadline, a prior commitment, literally anything. Instead, he heard himself saying yes because underneath all his good intentions and protective instincts, he was just a lonely man who wanted to spend time with people who made him feel less alone. Dinner started awkwardly. Nina avoided his eyes, focused intensely on helping Claire prepare food, maintained careful physical distance. But as the evening progressed and wine flowed, the old ease returned. They talked about books and politics, and Claire's plans for the apartment now that Richard was gone. Nina gradually relaxed, her sharp intelligence emerging from behind the walls she'd built, and Lucas remembered why he'd gotten into this mess in the first place. She was brilliant and funny, and saw the world with such clarity it was sometimes painful. She challenged his opinions, made him defend ideas he'd held loosely, pushed him to think deeper about everything. And when she laughed, really laughed, not the polite social performance, something in Lucas's chest felt both lighter and more damaged. Claire excused herself around 10, claiming exhaustion, leaving Lucas and Nina in the living room with the remainder of a wine bottle between them. "I should go too," Lucas said immediately. "Stay," Nina said. "Mom's going to bed, not disappearing. We can have one conversation like adults without it being a crisis." Lucas knew this was a rationalization, but he stayed anyway because his willpower had eroded over the course of the evening, and he was tired of being strong. They talked for another hour, careful and cautious, maintaining the friendship boundary even as they both felt it straining. Nina told him about her research, about trying to understand why people recreated their childhood traumas in adult relationships, choosing partners who confirmed their worst beliefs about themselves. "So you're basically saying we're all doomed to repeat our parents' mistakes?" Lucas asked. "Not doomed, but awareness doesn't always equal change. I can know intellectually that I'm drawn to emotionally unavailable men because of my father, but knowing it doesn't make the pattern disappear." She looked at him significantly. "Sometimes you just have to feel the feeling and choose differently despite it." "Is that what you're doing? Choosing differently?" "I'm trying to." Nina set her wine glass down. "My therapist suggested I write a letter to you, not to send, just to process. Get all the feelings out so I could move on." "Did you?" "Wrote 17 drafts. None of them said what I actually felt because what I actually felt was too complicated to fit into words." She smiled sadly. "Turns out some things you just have to carry." Lucas wanted to ask what the letters said, wanted to know what she'd written and edited and ultimately kept to herself. But asking felt like crossing another line. "I'm proud of you," he said instead, "for doing the work, for getting help. That takes real courage. You say that like you haven't done the same thing, like you didn't completely rebuild your life after your divorce. That was survival, not courage. Sometimes they're the same thing." The conversation continued in circles, intimate and careful, both of them aware they were dancing around something, but neither willing to name it directly. Around midnight, Lucas finally forced himself to stand, to say goodnight, to leave before the wine and the lateness and the particular vulnerability of the moment convinced him to do something irreversible. Nina walked him to the door, and for a moment they stood there in the small entryway, close enough that Lucas could count her heartbeats in the pulse at her throat. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for tonight, for still being willing to talk to me after I made everything so complicated." "You didn't make it complicated, Nina. It just is complicated." "Yeah." She reached out like she was going to touch his arm, then caught herself. "Good night, Lucas." "Good night." He made it back to his apartment, closed and locked the door, and stood in the dark feeling like he'd just survived something that should have been simple but wasn't. The next 2 weeks followed a similar pattern. Nina would find excuses to see him, running into him at the bodega, knocking on his door to borrow something Claire needed, appearing in the building's courtyard when he was there with his laptop. Each encounter felt both accidental and inevitable, and each time Lucas told himself it was fine. They were just being friendly. Nothing was actually happening. Except something was happening. The tension was building like pressure in a closed system, and Lucas knew from physics and failed marriages that pressure always found a way to release. Claire seemed happy that Nina was engaging more, attributed it to her daughter feeling better, being more settled. She thanked Lucas repeatedly for being such a good influence, for getting Nina out of her head. The irony was excruciating. Jamie came for Thanksgiving weekend, and Lucas used his son as a buffer, a reason to maintain appropriate boundaries. They did the usual father-son things, basketball games, movies, terrible fast food that Angela would disapprove of. Jamie was full of stories about school and his new girlfriend and plans for getting into a good college, the future unfolding before him like a map he couldn't wait to follow. You ever gonna date again? Jamie asked over burgers one afternoon, the question coming out of nowhere with that teenage directness. Maybe someday, Lucas said carefully. Why? Mom has a boyfriend. Thought you should know. Lucas absorbed this information, surprised by how little it hurt. Good for her. Is he nice to you? Yeah, he's fine. Kind of boring, but in a dad way, you know? Jamie paused. Mom seems happy. Happier than I remember her being when you were together. That's good. That's what matters. So why aren't you happy? The question landed like a punch. What makes you think I'm not happy? Jamie gave him a look that suggested his 16-year-old son saw through every defense Lucas had constructed. You're alone all the time, Dad. And don't say you like it that way because I can tell you don't. Lucas didn't know how to respond to that level of perception, so he deflected with humor and changed the subject, but the question stayed with him. His teenage son could see what Lucas had been denying, that he'd built a life that was safe and controlled and fundamentally lonely. The week after Thanksgiving, Nina stopped by his apartment with a bottle of wine and a request that felt dangerous the moment she voiced it. I need your help with something, she said, standing in his doorway, looking uncertain. My mom's out of town for a few days, visiting her sister, and I'm supposed to be processing my dissertation situation, figuring out next steps. But I can't think in that apartment. Everything there reminds me of all my failures. Nina, I was wondering if I could work here sometimes, just during the day. I won't bother you. I'll just sit in your living room with my laptop and books. You can work in your room or wherever. We don't even have to talk. She rushed the words out like she'd rehearsed them. I know it's weird, but that apartment feels like it's suffocating me, and I need somewhere else to think. Lucas knew he should say no, knew that having Nina in his space for hours at a time, day after day, was a catastrophically bad idea. But he looked at her face and saw genuine desperation, the kind that came from feeling trapped in your own life, and he remembered what that felt like. Okay, he heard himself say, but we're setting ground rules. Nina's face transformed with relief. Absolutely, whatever you need. They established the rules over the bottle of wine she'd brought. Work during daylight hours only, maintain separate spaces in the apartment, no personal conversations that ventured into dangerous territory, everything professional and boundaried and safe. The rules lasted approximately 6 hours into the first day. Nina arrived Tuesday morning with her laptop and a stack of books about attachment theory and family systems. Lucas set her up at his dining table while he worked in his bedroom, both of them existing in separate orbits within the same space. It should have been fine. For the first few hours it was. They worked in companionable silence, the only sounds typing and page turning and occasional frustrated sighs from Nina's direction when her research wasn't cooperating. Around noon, Lucas emerged to make lunch and found Nina with her head in her hands, surrounded by papers, looking defeated. You okay? He asked. I hate all of this, she said without looking up. 2 years of work and none of it means anything without my advisor's framework. I'm going to have to start completely over. What if you didn't? Didn't what? Start over. What if you kept the research but built a different framework around it? Use the loss of your advisor as part of the thesis, how attachment figures disappearing forces you to develop your own theoretical foundation instead of relying on theirs. Nina looked up at him, something sparking in her eyes. That's actually brilliant, like genuinely brilliant. I have my moments. They ended up having lunch together, talking through her research, Lucas asking questions that helped her think in new directions. Nina's energy shifted from defeated to excited, her mind clearly racing with possibilities. You should have been an academic, she said at one point. You think like one. I'm too undisciplined for academia. I like being able to work in sweatpants and take breaks whenever I want. See, that's what I'm realizing. I thought I wanted the structure of academia, the legitimacy, but maybe I just wanted my father to finally approve of something I did. She smiled ruefully. More therapy material. The afternoon dissolved into conversation, work forgotten, boundaries eroding in that easy way they always did when Nina and Lucas spent time together. They talked about everything, her research, his projects, books they'd read, the particular loneliness of ambitious people who'd realized their ambitions didn't actually make them happy. I think that's my problem, Nina said at some point. They'd migrated to the living room, both sitting on opposite ends of the couch, careful to maintain physical distance even as emotional distance disappeared. I keep thinking the next achievement will fix me. The degree, the research, the career. But none of it touches the actual emptiness. What do you think would touch it? Nina looked at him for a long moment, and Lucas saw the answer in her eyes before she said it. Don't, he said quietly. I wasn't going to say anything. Your face said it for you. She laughed, but it was sad. Am I that obvious? Only to me, because I'm feeling the same thing. The admission came out before Lucas could stop it, and he watched Nina's expression shift from resigned to hopeful to scared in rapid succession. Lucas, this was a bad idea, he said, standing abruptly. You being here. I thought we could handle it, but we can't. I can't. Nothing happened, Nina said, but she was standing too, moving closer. We're just talking. We're not just talking, and you know it. Lucas put the couch between them, needing the physical barrier. Every day you're here, every conversation, it gets harder to remember why we can't do this. Maybe that's because the reasons aren't actually as important as we keep pretending they are. Nina, your mother is my friend, my closest friend in this building. He couldn't even finish the sentence. My mother is getting divorced from a man who ignored her for 27 years. Maybe she'd understand better than you think. You don't believe that. Nina's face fell. No, I don't. She'd feel betrayed, and she'd be right to feel betrayed. You've been this steady presence in her life, this person she trusts, and sleeping with her daughter would destroy that. So we agree this is impossible. Agreeing something is impossible doesn't make wanting it disappear. Nina sat back down, defeated. I'll go. You're right, this was a bad idea. I'll figure something else out. She started gathering her things, shoving papers into her bag with shaking hands, and Lucas felt something in him break watching her retreat. He'd spent years being careful, being appropriate, doing the right thing. And he was so tired of it. Tired of being alone. Tired of denying what he felt because the circumstances were inconvenient. Tired of watching Nina hurt and knowing he was part of why she was hurting. Wait, he said. Nina stopped, looked at him warily. You can stay. Work here during the day like we planned, but we need actual boundaries, not the fake ones we keep pretending we have. What kind of boundaries? No wine, no late evenings, no conversations about feelings or loneliness or any of the things that got us here. You work, I work, we exist in the same space professionally. That's it. Nina nodded slowly. I can do that. Can you? I have to, she said quietly. Because the alternative is losing you completely, and I don't think I can handle that right now. The admission hung between them, raw and honest, and Lucas knew they were making a mistake, knew that proximity without boundaries would end exactly the way it always did. But he agreed anyway because he couldn't handle losing her completely either. The rest of that week passed in tense equilibrium. Nina worked at his dining table, Lucas in his bedroom, both of them carefully avoiding personal topics. But the awareness was constant, knowing she was in the next room, hearing her move around his space, the particular intimacy of sharing domestic space even in the most platonic way. Thursday evening, Nina was packing up to leave when Claire called her. Lucas could only hear Nina's side of the conversation but could piece together the shape of it from her responses. No, I'm fine. I've been working at a coffee shop. No, I'm not having panic attacks. Mom, I said I'm fine. Okay, yes, I'll call you tomorrow. I love you too. She hung up, looking exhausted. She worries, Nina said, more to herself than Lucas. She's your mother. It's her job. She's worried I'm going to fall apart like I did sophomore year. Nina started putting on her coat. After that summer, I had a pretty bad few months at school. Stopped going to classes, stopped eating properly. Had this moment where I called her at 3 a.m. convinced I was dying when really I was just having a panic attack. I didn't know, Lucas said quietly. How would you? I made sure you didn't. Couldn't let you know that you'd broken something in me. She smiled without humor. But don't worry, therapy helped. I learned all about how I use romantic rejection as proof of my unworthiness. Very enlightening. Nina, I never wanted to hurt you. I know, you've said that, and I believe you. But intent doesn't change impact, you know? You were trying to do the right thing, and I still ended up spending a year convinced I was fundamentally unlovable, because the one person who seemed to see me clearly had decided I wasn't worth the risk. The words were delivered calmly, clinically almost, which somehow made them hit harder. That's not why I stepped back, Lucas said. It was never about you not being worth it. It was about the circumstances being impossible. I know that intellectually, but emotionally? She shrugged. Still working on it. She left after that, and Lucas stood in his empty apartment feeling like he'd been hit by a truck. He'd known Nina had been hurt by what happened between them, but hearing the scope of it, the panic attacks, the self-destruction, the year of believing she was unlovable, made him feel like the worst kind of person. He thought he was protecting her. Turned out he'd just been protecting himself while she fell apart alone. Friday morning, Nina didn't show up to work. Lucas told himself it was fine, that maybe she'd found somewhere else, that the break was probably healthy for both of them. But by noon, he was worried enough to text her. His phone buzzed a minute later with her response. "Bad morning. Sorry, won't be there today." Lucas stared at the message, reading between the lines. Bad morning meant panic attack or depression spike or some other mental health crisis she was dealing with alone while her mother was out of town. He should have left it alone. Should have respected her space and let her handle it however she needed to handle it. Instead, he found himself knocking on the door of 3C, standing in the hallway like an idiot, knowing this was a terrible idea but unable to stop himself. Nina opened the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt that had clearly been slept in, her hair a mess, eyes red-rimmed. She looked young and broken, and Lucas felt his heart crack. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice rough. "Making sure you're okay." "I'm fine." "You're not fine, Nina. Can I come in?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. The apartment was a mess, papers everywhere, coffee cups on every surface, the detritus of someone barely functioning. "Mom's not home until Sunday," Nina said unnecessarily. "I know it's a disaster. I'll clean it before she gets back." Lucas looked at her, really looked at her, and saw past the accomplished PhD student and Claire's brilliant daughter to the 24-year-old woman who was barely holding herself together. "Have you eaten today?" he asked. "I'm not hungry." That wasn't the question. Nina sank onto the couch, pulling her knees to her chest. "I woke up and couldn't remember why any of this mattered. The dissertation, the degree, any of it. Just felt like I was performing this version of success that didn't actually mean anything." Lucas sat down beside her, maintaining careful distance. "That's the depression talking. Or it's clarity. Maybe I've been fooling myself this whole time, thinking academic achievement would fill whatever's broken in me." She looked at him. "My therapist says I have abandonment issues from my father's emotional absence, that I chase validation from unavailable men because it recreates the familiar pattern of my childhood. Very neat, very psychological, but knowing the pattern doesn't make it stop." "What do you need right now?" Lucas asked gently. "In this moment, what would help?" Nina was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I need someone to tell me I'm not crazy, that what I feel isn't just damage or pathology or whatever, that wanting connection isn't me being broken." "You're not crazy," Lucas said firmly. "Wanting to be seen and valued and understood is the most human thing there is. There's nothing broken about that. Even when the person I want it from is completely inappropriate." The question hung between them, dangerous and direct. "Even then," Lucas said quietly, "the wanting isn't wrong, Nina. It's what we do with the wanting that matters." She shifted closer, close enough that their legs were almost touching. "What if I'm tired of doing the right thing with it? What if just for once I wanted to stop thinking about consequences and just feel something real?" Lucas knew this was the moment, the crisis point, the place where he either maintained the boundary or let it dissolve completely. "Nina," he started, but she cut him off. "I'm not asking you to fix me. I'm not asking you to save me or complete me or any of that fairy tale bullshit. I'm just asking—" Her voice broke. "I'm asking if you feel it too. This thing between us. Because if I'm the only one, if I've been imagining it this whole time, I need to know so I can finally let it go." Every rational thought in Lucas's head screamed at him to lie. To tell her it was one-sided, to give her the closure she needed to move on. To to be the adult and protect them both from what would happen if he admitted the truth. But he was so tired of lying, tired of pretending, tired of being alone and watching her be alone when they could be less alone together. "I feel it," he admitted, the words coming out raw. "Every day, every conversation, every moment you're near me, I feel it. And it terrifies me because I don't know how to want you and still be a good person." Nina's breath caught. "Lucas, but wanting you doesn't mean acting on it," he continued, forcing himself to finish the thought. "Because you're right about consequences. This would destroy your relationship with your mother, would make me exactly the kind of man I promised myself I'd never be, would turn something that's been important and real into something tainted. Or," Nina said softly, moving even closer, "it would turn something that's been painful and impossible into something that finally makes sense." She reached for his hand and Lucas let her take it, let her fingers lace through his, let himself feel the simple contact he'd been denying for years. Her hand was warm, slightly trembling, and the touch felt like coming home and jumping off a cliff simultaneously. "We can't do this," he said, but he didn't pull away. "I know. Your mother, I know. The age difference, I know, Lucas. I know all the reasons. I've been listing them to myself for 4 years. She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much, too young. "But right now, in this moment, I don't care about any of them. I just care that I've spent 4 years feeling invisible, and you're the only person who makes me feel seen." She leaned in slowly, giving him time to stop this, to be the adult, to do the right thing. Lucas knew he should pull back, knew this was the line that once crossed would change everything. But he didn't pull back. Their lips met carefully at first, tentative, like they were both afraid the other would disappear. Then Nina made a small sound in the back of her throat and deepened the kiss, and Lucas felt years of restraint shatter like glass. He pulled her closer, hands in her hair, 4 years of wanting compressed into this single moment. She tasted like coffee and tears, and every bad decision he'd ever been tempted to make. The kiss was desperate and complicated and felt both completely wrong and perfectly right. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucas saw his own confusion and desire and fear reflected in Nina's face. "We need to stop," he said, but his hands were still in her hair. "I know." But she was leaning in again. They kissed for what might have been minutes or hours, time losing meaning in the gravity of what they were doing. Lucas's brain screamed at him to stop, to think about Claire, about consequences, about all the reasons this was catastrophic. But his heart, his lonely, damaged heart, that had spent 7 years locked away, was telling him to hold on and never let go. Finally, Lucas found the strength to pull back, to put physical space between them before this went somewhere they couldn't come back from. "Nina, we have to stop, right now, before this becomes something we can't take back." Nina nodded, her lips swollen from kissing, tears streaming down her face. "I know, you're right. We have to stop. This can't happen again. I know." They sat there on opposite ends of the couch, both shaking, both trying to process what they'd just done. Lucas felt like he'd been hit by lightning, every nerve alive, every defense destroyed, his entire careful life upended in the space of a kiss. "I should go," he said finally. "Yeah." But neither of them moved. They just sat there in the wreckage of their restraint, knowing they'd crossed a line they couldn't uncross, knowing everything was different now, knowing they'd just made a mistake that would haunt them both. "Lucas?" Nina's voice was small. "Yeah? Thank you." "For what?" "For stopping, for being strong enough for both of us, for caring enough to protect me from my own bad decisions." Lucas looked at her, this brilliant, damaged, beautiful woman who'd somehow become the center of something he couldn't name, and felt the full weight of what they'd almost done crash over him. He stood up, moved toward the door on legs that didn't feel steady. At the threshold, he turned back. "This can't happen again, Nina. I mean it. Next time I might not be strong enough to stop." "I know," she said quietly. "That's what scares me, because neither will I." Lucas left, closed the door behind him, and stood in the hallway trying to remember how to breathe. His lips still tingled from kissing her. His hands still felt the softness of her hair. His heart still raced with want and fear and the terrible knowledge that he'd just proven every boundary could break with enough pressure. He made it back to his apartment, closed the door, and stood in the dark feeling like he'd just survived something that should have destroyed him but had instead revealed exactly how fragile his careful control had always been. Through the wall, he could hear Nina crying. Soft, muffled sobs that made him want to go back, to hold her, to tell her everything would be okay, even though he had no idea if that was true. Instead, he sat on his couch in the dark, head in his hands, and tried to figure out how to come back from this, how to face Claire, how to face himself, how to exist in this building with Nina on the other side of a wall that had never felt thinner. The kiss had lasted maybe 5 minutes. But Lucas knew with certainty that those 5 minutes had just changed everything, and there was no going back to pretending they were just neighbors, just friends, just two lonely people who happened to understand each other. They'd crossed the line, and now they had to figure out how to live with what that meant. The next morning arrived with the particular heaviness that comes after doing something you can't undo. Lucas woke up with Nina's taste still on his lips, the memory of her hands in his hair, the sound of her breathing as they'd kissed like people drowning who'd finally found air. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the building wake up around him, and tried to convince himself it had been a dream. It hadn't been a dream. He'd kissed his neighbor's daughter, his friend's daughter, a woman 22 years younger than him who'd been struggling with a mental health crisis. He'd crossed every boundary he'd spent years defending, and the worst part was how much he wanted to do it again. Lucas forced himself out of bed, made coffee with hands that still shook slightly, and tried to figure out what the hell he was supposed to do now. Apologize? Pretend it never happened? Move out of the building and change his identity? The knock on his door came before he'd finished his first cup of coffee. He knew who it would be. Part of him had been waiting for it. Nina stood in the hallway looking like she hadn't slept at all. Same clothes as yesterday, hair still a mess, but her eyes were clearer, more determined. "We need to talk," she said. Lucas stepped aside to let her in, every nerve screaming that this was a bad idea but unable to deny her anything when she looked at him like that. They stood in his living room, careful to maintain distance, both hyper-aware of what happened the last time they'd been alone together. "I'm sorry," they said simultaneously, then stopped. "You first," Lucas said. Nina took a breath. "I'm sorry for putting you in that position. You came over to check on me, and I turned it into something it shouldn't have been. You were being kind, and I took advantage of that." "Nina, no. I kissed you back. I wanted to kiss you back. You didn't take advantage of anything. But I initiated it. I crossed the line first. And I could have stopped it, should have stopped it immediately. Instead, He ran his hands through his hair, frustrated with himself. "I let my loneliness override my judgment, and I'm sorry. It won't happen again." Nina looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable in her expression. "Do you regret it?" The question was simple but loaded with everything they weren't saying. "I regret the circumstances," Lucas said carefully. "I regret that it's complicated and impossible and would hurt your mother. But the kiss itself?" He met her eyes. "No, I don't regret that." Something shifted in Nina's face, hope and fear mixing together. "I don't regret it either. And I know I should. I know it was wrong and inappropriate and all the things we keep saying, but I don't regret finally knowing what it feels like to be wanted by you." "Nina, let me finish." She held up a hand. "I spent all night thinking about this, about us, about what we're doing. And I realized something. We've been having the same conversation for 4 years, about why we can't be together, why it's impossible, all the reasons it won't work. But we never actually talk about what happens next. We just keep existing in this limbo where we're not together, but we're not apart either." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we need to make an actual decision. Either we're doing this, acknowledging what's between us and figuring out how to navigate it, or we're not. But we can't keep doing this halfway thing where we pretend we're just friends while clearly being something else." Lucas felt his heart racing. "You're asking me to choose. Right now. I'm asking us both to choose, because this limbo is killing me, has been killing me for years. Nina, you know what would happen if we chose to be together. Your mother would never forgive either of us. You'd lose your relationship with her." "Maybe. Or maybe she'd understand eventually. She's been through her own relationship struggles, She knows better than anyone how complicated these things can be. She's my friend, my closest friend in this building. I can't betray her like that. So your friendship with my mother is more important than what's between us. The question wasn't accusatory, just honest. Lucas wanted to say yes, wanted to be noble and selfless and choose the right thing, but the truth was more complicated. It's not about importance, he said finally. It's about what I can live with. And I don't know if I can live with being the kind of man who sleeps with his friend's daughter, who takes advantage of— Stop, Nina cut him off, her voice sharp. Stop framing this like you're taking advantage of me. I'm 24 years old. I have a graduate degree. I'm in therapy. I know my own mind. And I'm telling you clearly and directly that I want this. Want you. Not because you're a father figure or because I have daddy issues or whatever psychological explanation makes you feel less guilty, but because you're the only person who makes me feel like I'm not performing some version of myself to be acceptable. That doesn't make it appropriate. Why not? Because you're older? Because you know my mother? Those are circumstances, Lucas, not character flaws. We're both adults who are lonely and understand each other and care about each other. Why is that wrong? Lucas sank onto the couch, exhausted by the circular logic they kept falling into. I don't know, Nina. I don't have all the answers. I just know that every time I think about being with you, I feel guilty. And I don't know how to build something real on a foundation of guilt. Nina sat down beside him, close but not touching. What if we told her? What? My mom. What if we just told her, explained that this happened, that we tried to fight it, that we're both adults making a choice? She would be devastated. Maybe. Or maybe she'd surprise us. Nina paused. She stayed in a dead marriage for 27 years because she was afraid of what leaving would mean. I don't want to make that same mistake. Don't want to spend decades wondering what could have been because I was too scared to be honest. Lucas looked at her, this brilliant, brave woman who kept choosing honesty even when lies would be easier, and felt something in him crack open. I don't know if I can do that, he said quietly. Tell Claire. Watch her face when she realizes that He couldn't finish the sentence. Then what? We just keep pretending? Keep having these conversations every few months where we acknowledge our feelings and then do nothing about them? Nina's voice was gentle but firm. I can't keep doing that, Lucas. It's destroying me. Either we're together or we're not, but I need an actual answer. The ultimatum hung between them, clear and undeniable. Lucas had spent years avoiding this exact moment, but Nina was right. They couldn't keep existing in limbo forever. I need time, he said finally, to think, to figure out if I can live with what it would mean. How much time? I don't know. A few days? A week? Just time to process this without you in front of me, making it impossible to think clearly. Nina nodded slowly. Okay, I can give you that. But Lucas, I'm going back to the city in 2 weeks to meet with my new dissertation advisor. When I leave, I need to know where we stand. I can't keep putting my life on hold for something that might never happen. That's fair. She stood to leave, and Lucas walked her to the door, feeling like he was watching something precious slip away. Nina? He said as she stepped into the hallway. Yeah? For what it's worth, if circumstances were different, if we'd met some other way, if your mother wasn't part of this, I'd choose you in a heartbeat. Her eyes filled with tears. But circumstances aren't different. No, they're not. She left, and Lucas closed the door, leaning against it as he heard her apartment door shut across the hall. The building fell quiet again, but the silence felt different now, charged, waiting. Lucas spent the weekend in a fog of indecision. He ran the scenarios in his mind over and over, telling Claire, not telling Claire, being with Nina, not being with Nina. Every option felt wrong in different ways. He called his therapist, who he'd been seeing sporadically since the divorce, and scheduled an emergency session. Dr. Martinez listened patiently as Lucas laid out the situation, careful to keep names and identifying details vague, though he suspected she could read between the lines. What are you most afraid of? Doctor, Martinez asked when he'd finished. Hurting Claire. Becoming someone I don't respect. Making a choice I can't take back. Those are all external fears. What are you afraid of for yourself? Lucas sat with the question, trying to find the truth underneath all his rationalizations. I'm afraid that if I let myself have this, if I let myself be happy with Nina, something will go wrong, that I don't deserve it or can't sustain it, or that it will fall apart and I'll be even more alone than I am now. So you're choosing loneliness because it feels safer than risking disappointment. When you put it like that, it sounds pathetic. It sounds human, Dr. Martinez said gently. After your divorce, you built walls to protect yourself. Those walls served a purpose, but now they might be keeping out something that could be good for you. Even if that something would hurt other people? That's a question only you can answer. But I'd encourage you to think about whether staying away from Nina is actually protecting Claire, or if it's just protecting you from having to deal with difficult emotions. The session left Lucas more confused than before. He'd wanted clear answers, ethical guidelines, someone to tell him definitively what the right choice was. Instead, he got more questions. He avoided Nina for 3 days, leaving the apartment only when necessary, working late into the night to distract himself. Through the walls, he could hear her moving around 3C, the sounds of her daily life that had become so familiar. Music at odd hours, the kettle whistling, her voice on phone calls with her mother or her therapist or whoever else was helping her navigate this mess. On Tuesday evening, Claire came home from Connecticut. Lucas knew because he heard Nina's excited greeting, heard mother and daughter catching up, heard the normalcy of their relationship that he was contemplating destroying. Wednesday morning, Claire knocked on his door. Lucas's heart stopped, convinced somehow that Nina had told her everything, that this was the confrontation he'd been dreading. Instead, Claire stood there with a casserole dish and a tired smile. I made too much, she said, the same excuse she'd used 7 years ago when they first met. Thought you might want some. Lucas took the dish, invited her in for coffee, performed normalcy while his guilt sat heavy in his chest. They talked about her trip, about Richard's latest attempt to negotiate the divorce settlement, about Nina's decision to take a semester off and restructure her dissertation. I'm worried about her, Claire said, cradling her coffee mug. She seems better than when I left, but there's something different, like she's made some decision I'm not aware of. Lucas felt sweat prickle at the back of his neck. Maybe she's just processing everything. The dissertation situation, the time off. That's a lot to handle. Maybe. Claire looked at him with those knowing eyes. You've been good for her, you know. She mentioned that she's been working at coffee shops, getting out of the apartment. I think your friendship has helped her more than she lets on. The word friendship felt like a knife between his ribs. I'm glad I could help, Lucas managed. You've helped both of us. I don't know what I would have done these past 7 years without you. You've been such a constant presence, such a good friend. She reached over and squeezed his hand. I hope you know how much that means to me. Lucas felt like the worst person alive. This woman trusted him, valued him, considered him one of her closest friends. And he was sitting here having kissed her daughter 2 days ago, contemplating a relationship that would shatter that trust irreparably. After Claire left, Lucas sat in his apartment and felt the full weight of his situation crash down. He couldn't have both. Couldn't be with Nina and maintain his friendship with Claire. The choice was binary and brutal. That evening, he knocked on Nina's door. She answered looking surprised, wary. Can we talk? He asked. She let him in. Claire was out, book club or yoga or something, leaving them alone again. They sat in the living room where 4 years ago Lucas had first felt the pull of something inappropriate, where everything had started. I talked to your mom today, Lucas said. She was telling me how much my friendship means to her, how grateful she is to have me in her life. Nina's face fell. So that's it then. You're choosing her. I'm choosing not to destroy her, Lucas said quietly. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like you're choosing comfort and safety over the possibility of something real. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm a coward. But Nina, I can't look your mother in the eye knowing I'm sleeping with her daughter. I can't have coffee with her and pretend everything's normal while hiding something that would devastate her. So we just go back to how things were? Pretending we don't feel this? I don't know how we do that. I don't know if we can do that. Lucas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. But I know I can't be the kind of man who betrays a friend like this. I know that if we did this, if we were together, it would eat at me. Every moment of happiness would be tainted by guilt. Nina was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but sad. I understand. I don't like it, but I understand. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing. You're making the choice you think is right. I can respect that even if it breaks my heart. Lucas felt tears burning behind his eyes. You'll meet someone, Nina. Someone your own age who doesn't come with all this baggage and complication. Someone who can give you what you deserve. You keep saying that, like I'm some naive kid who doesn't know what I want. She looked at him directly. I know what I want, Lucas. I want you. But I also know that wanting something doesn't mean you get to have it. I learned that lesson a long time ago. They sat in heavy silence, both mourning something that never quite existed, but felt real enough to grieve. I think I need to move out, Nina said finally. What? Not right away, but soon. I can't live across the hall from you. Can't keep running into you and pretending my heart doesn't break a little every time. I'll find a place in the city, be closer to campus anyway. Nina, you don't have to do that. Yes, I do. For me. Because you're right that we can't keep doing this limbo thing. And if we're not together, then I need actual distance. Not just emotional distance while living 20 feet away. Lucas wanted to argue but knew she was right. The proximity had been killing them both slowly for years. When will you tell your mom? After I get back from meeting my advisor. Give me a few weeks to figure out logistics. She smiled sadly. Don't worry, I won't tell her why I'm moving. That secret's safe. I never wanted it to be a secret. I know, that's what makes this so hard. You're trying to do the right thing, and I'm trying to do the right thing, and we both end up miserable anyway. Lucas stood to leave, feeling like he'd just made a terrible mistake, even though he knew it was the only choice he could live with. At the door, Nina touched his arm gently. Lucas? Thank you. For what? For being honest. For not leading me on or making promises you couldn't keep. For caring enough about my mom to protect her even when it costs you. She paused. You're a good person. I hope someday that doesn't feel like such a burden. Then she closed the door, and Lucas walked back to his apartment feeling like he'd just survived something that should have destroyed him. The next 2 weeks were agony. Lucas and Nina maintained careful distance, exchanging only polite nods in the hallway, existing as strangers who happened to share a building. Claire noticed nothing, too caught up in her own life. The divorce proceedings, her sister's drama, her book club gossip. Jamie came for his regular weekend and immediately noticed something was wrong. You okay, Dad? He asked over breakfast Saturday morning. Yeah, just tired. Work's been busy. Jamie gave him that look again, the one that said he saw through every defense. You seem sad. Just got a lot on my mind, buddy. Is it about a girl? Lucas nearly choked on his coffee. What? No. Why would you think that? Because you have that look Mom used to get when you guys were fighting but pretending everything was fine. Like you're sad but trying to hide it. Sometimes Lucas forgot how perceptive his son had become. It's complicated grown-up stuff. Nothing for you to worry about. That's what you always say. Jamie paused. But for what it's worth, if you like someone, you should tell them. Life's too short to be sad about stuff you never tried. Lucas looked at his 16-year-old son dispensing wisdom beyond his years. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just don't notice because I'm your kid. They spent the weekend doing normal father-son things, but Jamie's words stuck with Lucas. Life's too short to be sad about stuff you never tried. Except Lucas had tried, had kissed Nina, had allowed himself to want her fully for one moment, and now he was living with the aftermath of knowing exactly what he was giving up. The following Tuesday, Nina left for Manhattan to meet her new advisor. Lucas watched from his window as she loaded a bag into a car service, Claire hugging her goodbye on the sidewalk. Mother and daughter holding each other, unaware of the secret stretching between them. After Nina was gone, Lucas felt the apartment building shift somehow. The air felt thinner, the hallway quieter. The particular presence that had defined his existence for 7 years suddenly absent. He tried to focus on work, on the projects that had been piling up while he navigated this emotional crisis. But concentration felt impossible. He'd sit at his computer and find himself staring at the wall he shared with 3C, listening for sounds that weren't there anymore. A week passed. Then another. Lucas fell back into his routine. Work, Jamie on weekends, occasional dinners with Claire, who seemed lighter now that the divorce was progressing. She'd started talking about traveling, about things she wanted to do now that she wasn't tied to Richard's schedule. Nina's looking at apartments in Manhattan, she mentioned one evening. They were having wine in her apartment, the space feeling different with Richard's things gone, and Nina's impending departure changing the equation. She says she wants to be closer to campus, but I think she just wants independence. Can't blame her, she's been living at home for months. That makes sense, Lucas said, keeping his voice neutral. I'm going to be so lonely when she's gone, Claire admitted. First Richard, now Nina. This apartment's going to feel like a tomb. You could get a roommate, or a dog. Claire laughed. A dog might be nice, something that actually wants my company. She looked at Lucas. I'm grateful I'll still have you around. Don't know what I'd do without our dinners. The guilt was crushing. Lucas smiled and nodded and poured more wine, all while knowing that if Nina had made a different choice, if he had made a different choice, this friendship would be over. Claire would hate him. She'd have every right to. He'd made the right call. He knew that. But knowing something intellectually didn't make it hurt less. 3 weeks after Nina left, Lucas was coming home from a run when he saw her in the building lobby with Claire. They were looking at something on Nina's phone, both smiling. Lucas's heart stopped. Lucas, Claire called out. Perfect timing. Nina's found an apartment. Show him the pictures. Nina met his eyes briefly, something unreadable in her expression, before holding out her phone. Lucas looked at the pictures, a small studio in Greenwich Village, exposed brick and tall windows. The kind of place that cost a fortune but looked perfect for a graduate student building a new life. It's great, he said, handing the phone back. When do you move? 2 weeks, Nina said, once I sign the lease. We should have a going-away dinner, Claire suggested. Something nice, the three of us. Lucas wanted to refuse, wanted any excuse to avoid that particular torture. But Nina was looking at him with challenge in her eyes, daring him to say no. Sure, he heard himself say. That sounds nice. The dinner was scheduled for the following Saturday. Lucas spent the intervening days trying to prepare himself emotionally for what would essentially be a goodbye. Nina was leaving, moving to a different part of the city. They'd probably never see each other again except for occasional holidays when she visited Claire. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like loss. Saturday arrived with the kind of cold clarity that December in New York specialized in. Lucas dressed carefully, not too formal, not too casual, trying to hit the note of neighbor friend attending a farewell dinner without revealing that his heart was breaking. They went to a French place in Park Slope, somewhere expensive enough to feel special, but not so fancy that it was uncomfortable. Claire was animated, telling stories about Nina's childhood, embarrassing moments and proud achievements mixed together. Nina played along, laughing at the right moments, performing the role of grateful daughter. Lucas watched them both and felt like he was seeing a play where he knew the real script, but everyone else was working from a different version. Over dessert, Claire raised her glass. To Nina. To new beginnings and brilliant dissertations and all the amazing things you're going to accomplish. They clinked glasses and Lucas caught Nina's eye across the table. She held his gaze for just a moment too long, and he saw everything they weren't saying reflected there. After dinner, they walked back to the building through streets decorated with Christmas lights. Claire walked ahead, pointing out window displays, while Lucas and Nina fell slightly behind. So this is it, Nina said quietly, her breath visible in the cold air. Yeah, guess so. I'm not going to see you again, am I? Not really. Maybe at holidays when I visit Mom, but that's not the same. Probably not, Lucas admitted. I want you to know something, Nina said, stopping on the sidewalk. Claire had turned a corner ahead, out of sight for a moment. I don't regret any of it. The conversations, the friendship, even the complicated parts. You changed my life, Lucas Reed. Made me believe I was worth being seen. Nina. I'm not looking for anything from you. I just needed to say it, to thank you. Because despite everything that didn't happen, knowing you still mattered. Lucas felt something break loose in his chest. It mattered to me too, more than I can say. They stood there on a Brooklyn street corner in December, two people who'd somehow become essential to each other without ever being together, and let themselves feel the goodbye. Claire reappeared around the corner. You two coming? I'm freezing. They walked the final blocks in silence, entered the building together for what Lucas knew would be one of the last times. At the elevator, Claire hugged Nina hard. "I'm so proud of you, baby," she said. "You're going to do amazing things." Nina hugged her back, and Lucas saw tears in her eyes. "Love you, Mom." "Love you too." Claire went into her apartment, leaving Lucas and Nina alone in the hallway. "So," Nina said. "So. I'd say let's keep in touch, but that feels like torture." "Probably," Lucas agreed. Nina stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, close enough to feel her warmth. "Can I ask for one thing? Just one last thing before I go?" "Anything." "Can I hug you? As a goodbye? Just so I can remember what it feels like?" Lucas knew this was dangerous, knew that touching her at all would make everything harder. But he nodded, and Nina stepped into his arms. They held each other in the hallway of their building, her face pressed against his chest, his chin resting on top of her head. It wasn't sexual or inappropriate. It was just two lonely people holding on for a moment, acknowledging what they'd meant to each other, saying goodbye to something that had never quite existed, but felt real anyway. "Thank you," Nina whispered against his shirt, "for everything." "Take care of yourself," Lucas said. "And Nina, you're going to do brilliant things. I know it." She pulled back, wiped her eyes, smiled through tears. "You too. Try to let yourself be happy, okay? You deserve it." Then she went into her apartment, and Lucas stood in the empty hallway feeling like he'd just watched the sun set on something he'd never get to see again. He went back to his apartment, closed the door, and let himself feel the full weight of the choice he'd made. He'd protected Claire, protected Nina from a relationship that would have been complicated and difficult, protected himself from becoming someone he couldn't respect. But protection had costs. And tonight, alone in his apartment while Nina packed her life into boxes across the hall, Lucas felt every single one of them. 2 weeks later, Nina moved out. Lucas made sure to be out of the building that day, couldn't watch her leave, couldn't see Claire helping her daughter carry boxes while completely unaware of the parallel goodbye happening in the space between words. When he came home that evening, the building felt different, emptier. Claire mentioned over dinner that Nina was settled, that the apartment was small but perfect, that she seemed excited about this new chapter. "I'm going to miss having her across the hall," Claire said, "but this is good. She needs to build her own life." "Yeah," Lucas agreed. "It's good." And it was good. It was the right thing. It was everything it should have been. But that night, lying in bed, listening to the building settle around him, Lucas felt the absence like a physical thing. Nina was gone, really gone. And with her went the possibility of something he'd never quite allowed himself to want fully. He'd made his choice, chosen integrity over desire, friendship over romance, the right thing over the easy thing. He just wished doing the right thing didn't feel so much like losing. Months passed. Winter became spring. Lucas continued his life. Work, Jamie, dinners with Claire, who seemed happier now, lighter without the weight of her failed marriage. She'd started dating someone, a kind man from her book club who treated her well. Lucas was genuinely happy for her. Through Claire, he heard occasional updates about Nina. She was thriving in her program. Her new advisor was brilliant. Her dissertation was progressing well. She'd started dating someone, another PhD student. Claire seemed pleased. Lucas told himself he was pleased too, that this was the outcome he'd wanted. Nina moving on, building a life without him, finding happiness with someone appropriate. He almost believed it. Jamie graduated high school that spring, got accepted to NYU, would be living in Manhattan starting in the fall. Angela was proud and terrified in equal measure. Lucas was just trying to process that his son was an adult now, didn't need his father the way he once had. The weekend visits ended naturally as Jamie prepared for college, got a summer job, spent time with his girlfriend. Lucas found himself alone more and more, the apartment quiet in ways that used to feel comfortable but now just felt empty. One Saturday in June, Lucas ran into Nina. Completely by accident. He was in the village visiting a gallery for a client project, and there she was, walking down the street with a young man her own age. They were holding hands, laughing about something. Lucas froze on the sidewalk. Nina saw him at the same moment, her smile faltering slightly. "Lucas," she said, surprised. "Hi." "Hi." Sorry, I didn't mean to. I was just in the neighborhood for work. Oh, this is David. This is Lucas. He's my mom's neighbor. David shook his hand, friendly and oblivious to any undercurrent. Nice to meet you, man. You too. They stood there awkwardly, 6 months of absence compressing into this moment on a village sidewalk. How are you? Nina asked. Good. Busy. Jamie's heading to NYU in the fall. That's great. Tell him congratulations. I will. Lucas looked at David, then back at Nina. I should let you guys go. Nice to see you, Nina. Yeah, you too. He walked away, and it took everything in him not to look back. Nina had moved on, exactly like she was supposed to, exactly like he'd hoped she would. The ache in his chest suggested he'd been lying to himself about what he'd hoped for. That night, Claire called him. Nina mentioned she ran into you today. Yeah, in the village. She was with her boyfriend. He seems nice. David's sweet, very stable, which is probably what she needs after everything. Claire paused. She asked about you. Asked how you were doing. What did you tell her? That you're doing fine. Working a lot, missing Jamie now that he's growing up, the usual. Another pause. Are you doing fine, Lucas? You've seemed distant lately. I'm okay. Just adjusting to the empty nest thing, I guess. Well, you know you always have me. We lonely empty nesters have to stick together. After they hung up, Lucas sat in his quiet apartment and thought about choices and consequences and the way life had of moving forward whether you were ready or not. Nina was building a new life in Manhattan with a boyfriend who was age-appropriate and probably perfect for her. Claire was happy with her book club boyfriend. Jamie was heading to college. Everyone was moving forward except Lucas, who seemed stuck in the amber of a choice he'd made 6 months ago that still felt both right and devastating. He poured himself a drink, sat by the window watching Brooklyn spread out below him, and tried to make peace with the life he'd chosen. The safe life, the appropriate life, the lonely life. Somewhere across the city, Nina was probably having dinner with David, laughing and planning and building something real with someone who didn't come with impossible complications. It was what Lucas had wanted for her, what he'd chosen for both of them. He just hadn't expected it to hurt this much to get what he'd asked for. The story wasn't over. It was just waiting, breath held, for whatever came next. 3 years passed like water finding its level, settling into patterns that felt inevitable even when they'd once seemed impossible. Lucas turned 50, a milestone he marked with quiet resignation rather than celebration. Jamie finished his sophomore year at NYU, had changed majors twice, was dating someone seriously. Angela got married to the boring in a good way boyfriend, and Lucas attended the wedding with genuine happiness for her. Claire sold the apartment in Brooklyn. The divorce had finally settled after 2 years of lawyers and negotiations, and she'd decided she needed a fresh start somewhere that didn't carry the weight of 27 years of failed marriage. She moved to a smaller place in Queens, closer to her sister, and their dinners became less frequent but no less valued. You should move too, she'd said to Lucas over their last dinner before she left the building. Get out of Brooklyn. Try something new. But Lucas had stayed. The apartment had become comfortable in its familiarity, and he'd long ago made peace with the particular loneliness of living alone in a city of millions. He dated occasionally, women from dating apps, setups from well-meaning friends, brief connections that never quite sparked into anything lasting. He told himself he was content. Some days he even believed it. Through Claire, he heard about Nina in fragments. She'd finished her PhD, broken up with David after a year, was now working as a therapist specializing in family systems and attachment trauma. She'd published her dissertation to some acclaim, was building a private practice in Manhattan. Claire was enormously proud, showed Lucas articles Nina had written for psychology journals, talked about her daughter's success with the particular joy of a mother watching her child thrive. Lucas was happy for her, genuinely happy. The ache had dulled over 3 years into something manageable, a scar that only hurt when he pressed on it directly. He thought about her sometimes late at night, wondered what version of her existed now at 27, wondered if she ever thought about him, wondered if she'd found what she was looking for in all those therapy sessions and published papers in the new life she'd built away from Brooklyn. Mostly, he tried not to wonder, tried to focus on the life he had rather than the one he'd chosen not to pursue. It was a Tuesday evening in October when everything changed. Lucas was working late, lost in a design project, when his phone rang. Claire's name on the screen. "Hey," he answered. "What's up?" "Lucas, I need to tell you something." Her voice was tight, controlled in a way that suggested she was holding back tears. "I'm at the hospital. It's Nina." Lucas's heart stopped. "What happened? Is she okay?" "She's fine, physically fine, but Claire's voice broke. "She tried to hurt herself. Her roommate found her and called 911. She's in the psychiatric ward at Mount Sinai." The world tilted sideways. Lucas couldn't breathe, couldn't think beyond the immediate terror of Nina in crisis. "When? What can I do?" "It happened this morning. I've been here all day. The doctors say she's stable, but Lucas..." Claire started crying properly now. "I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help her. She won't really talk to me. Just keeps saying she's tired. So tired." "I'm coming," Lucas said, already grabbing his keys. "Which hospital? I'm coming right now." "You don't have to." "Claire, I'm coming. Send me the address." He took a cab to Manhattan, traffic making the 40-minute drive feel like hours. His mind raced through every conversation he'd ever had with Nina, looking for signs he'd missed, warnings he should have seen. The depression she'd struggled with years ago. The panic attacks, the way she'd always carried so much weight alone. The psychiatric ward was sterile and institutional, fluorescent lights and locked doors, and the particular smell of hospitals everywhere. Claire sat in a waiting area looking destroyed, her face blotchy from crying. She stood when she saw Lucas, and he pulled her into a hug without thinking. "Thank you for coming," she said into his shoulder. "I know it's late, I needed someone." "Of course. Always." "How is she?" "Sedated right now. The doctor said she took a lot of pills. Not enough to do what she intended, thank God. But enough that they're keeping her for observation." Claire pulled back, wiped her eyes. "They're going to do a psychiatric evaluation tomorrow. Might transfer her to an inpatient program." "What does Nina say about all this?" "She's barely said anything. Won't look at me. Won't explain what happened." Claire's voice cracked again. "I thought she was doing so well. Her practice was thriving. She seemed happy. How did I miss this?" Lucas had no answers. He sat with Claire in the sterile waiting room, holding her hand while she cried, feeling his own fear and guilt churning in his chest. Around midnight, a nurse came out. "Family of Nina Morgan?" Claire stood immediately. "That's me. I'm her mother." "She's awake and asking for someone," she said. The nurse checked her notes. "She said to ask if Lucas is here?" Claire looked at Lucas, confused. "She's asking for you?" Lucas felt something crack open in his chest. "Can I see her?" The nurse hesitated. "Are you family?" He's a family friend," Claire said. "Very close friend. I'll have to ask her if she consents to the visit. Wait here." After the nurse left, Claire turned to Lucas. "Why would she ask for you?" "I don't know," Lucas lied, his heart hammering. "Maybe she just wants someone who isn't her mother, someone less emotionally involved?" Claire nodded slowly, accepting this explanation. "If she'll talk to you, please try to understand what happened. The doctors need to know if this was impulsive or planned, if there are ongoing suicidal thoughts, but she won't tell them anything." The nurse returned. "She'll see you, but only you, and only for 10 minutes. Lucas followed the nurse through locked doors into the ward. She led him to a small room where Nina sat on a hospital bed in a gown, wrist bandages visible, her hair lank and face pale. She looked up when he entered, and something in her expression broke. "Lucas," she said, her voice rough. The nurse left, giving them privacy. Lucas stood frozen for a moment, looking at this woman he'd tried so hard to stop loving, seeing her at her most vulnerable. "Hi," he said finally, moving to sit in the chair beside her bed. "You came." "Of course I came. Claire called. She's terrified." Nina looked down at her bandaged wrists. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare everyone. I couldn't keep doing it anymore." "Doing what?" "Pretending, performing, being the successful therapist who helps other people when I can't even help myself." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out you can have a PhD in psychology and still be a mess." "What happened, Nina? What made you do this?" She was quiet for a long time, tears sliding down her face. "I've been trying so hard to move on, to build a life that makes sense, to be with people who are appropriate and safe and all the things I'm supposed to want. But nothing feels real. Nothing touches the actual emptiness. Lucas felt his throat tighten. You broke up with David. A year ago. There have been others since. None of them matter. None of them are... She stopped, looked at him directly. None of them are you. The admission hung in the sterile hospital air between them. Nina, I know. I know all the reasons why that's pathetic and unhealthy and exactly the kind of thinking I should have worked through in therapy by now. But I'm tired of lying, Lucas. Tired of pretending I don't still think about you every single day. Tired of carrying this alone. Lucas moved from the chair to sit on the edge of her bed, taking her hand carefully. I think about you too. More than I should. More than is probably healthy. Then why? Her voice broke. Why did we do this to ourselves? Why did we choose this loneliness instead of just being together? Because I thought it was the right thing, because I was trying to protect your mother, protect you, protect some idea of who I was supposed to be. He paused. But seeing you here, knowing you got to this point. Nina, if I'd known that staying away would hurt you this much, I would have made a different choice. Don't, Nina said, pulling her hand back. Don't make this about you saving me. I didn't do this because of you. I did it because I'm exhausted from trying to fix myself into something acceptable. You were just part of that. The biggest part, maybe, but not the only part. Okay, Lucas said gently. Then tell me what you need. Right now, in this moment, what would help? Nina looked at him with eyes that had seen too much, felt too much, carried too much alone. I need to stop lying to my mom, to my therapist, to myself. I need to stop pretending I'm okay when I'm not. And I need... She took a shaky breath. I need to tell my mom the truth. About us. About all of it. Lucas felt panic spike. Nina, you're in a fragile state right now. Maybe we should wait until... Until when? Until I'm stable? I've been waiting for stable for 3 years, Lucas. It's not coming. The only thing that's going to come is more pretending and more performing, and eventually I'll end up back here, or worse. She looked at him fiercely. I'm done lying. If that means losing my relationship with my mother, then that's what it means. But I can't keep carrying this secret. Let me talk to her first, Lucas said. Let me explain. It shouldn't come from you while you're in the hospital. You'll tell her? Everything? Lucas thought about Claire in the waiting room, devastated and confused, trusting him to help her daughter. Thought about the friendship they'd built over 10 years. Thought about how much this would hurt her. But he also thought about Nina in a hospital bed, about choices made from fear rather than honesty, about protecting people from truths that ended up hurting them more in the long run. Yeah, he said finally. I'll tell her. Nina's shoulders sagged with relief. Thank you. But Nina, you need to promise me something. Promise me you'll work with the doctors here, that you'll be honest with them about what you're feeling, that you'll let them help you. I promise. And promise me this wasn't about me, that if I'd never existed, you'd still choose to stay alive. Nina met his eyes. I can't promise that, because you did exist. You do exist. And pretending otherwise is part of what got me here. She paused. But I can promise that I want to live. That underneath all the exhaustion and sadness, there's still part of me that wants to see what comes next, even if it's hard. Lucas squeezed her hand. That's enough. We'll work with that. The nurse returned, indicating his time was up. Lucas stood, looked down at Nina one more time. I'm going to go talk to your mom now. It's going to be bad. She's going to be angry and hurt and feel betrayed. You need to prepare yourself for that. I know. Nina's voice was small. Tell her I'm sorry for lying to her for so long. Lucas walked back through the locked doors to the waiting room where Claire sat, anxious and hopeful. How is she? Claire asked immediately. Did she talk to you? Did she explain what happened? Lucas sat down heavily, trying to figure out how to start this conversation that would change everything. She talked, he said carefully, and there are some things I need to tell you. Things that are going to be hard to hear. Claire's face shifted from hopeful to wary. What things? Nina asked me to be honest with you about why she's been struggling, about what's been happening with her for the past several years. He took a breath. And it involves me. Involves both of us. I don't understand. Claire, Lucas forced himself to meet her eyes. Nina and I have feelings for each other. Have had feelings for each other for a long time. Nothing physical has happened beyond one kiss 3 years ago. We've kept it appropriate, kept our distance. But the feelings are there, and they've been there. And Nina's been carrying the weight of that while trying to move on, and it's been destroying her. Claire stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. What? I know how this sounds. I know how inappropriate it is. But I need you to understand that we tried to do the right thing. We stayed apart. We maintained boundaries. I chose our friendship over anything with Nina because I thought that was the right choice. You have feelings for my daughter. Claire's voice was flat, shocked. My daughter has feelings for you, and you've both been lying to me about this for how long? Years, Lucas admitted. Since she was 18, maybe earlier. We tried to fight it, tried to stay away from each other. We did stay away from each other, but the feelings didn't go away. Claire stood up abruptly, moving away from him like he was something toxic. You're 22 years older than her. You've known her since she was a teenager. You're my friend, my closest friend. And this whole time you've been, what? In love with my daughter? I don't know if it's love. I don't know what to call it. But yes, I care about her, more than I should, more than is appropriate. Did you sleep with her? The question was sharp, accusatory. No, I swear to you, nothing like that ever happened. But you wanted to. Lucas couldn't lie. Yes. Claire's face crumpled. She started crying, angry and hurt and betrayed all at once. How could you? How could both of you lie to me like this? I trusted you, Lucas. I told you everything about my life, my marriage, my fears about Nina, and the whole time you were... She couldn't finish the sentence. I'm sorry, Lucas said, knowing how inadequate the words were. I never wanted to hurt you. That's why we stayed apart. That's why I made the choice I made. But you're telling me now. Why? Why now? Because Nina's in a hospital bed, and part of why she's there is because she's been carrying this secret. Because trying to do the right thing, trying to protect you, has been killing her slowly. Lucas stood, facing Claire directly. I'm not telling you this to ask for your blessing or your understanding. I'm telling you because Nina needs to stop lying. We both need to stop lying. And if that means losing your friendship, then that's the consequence I have to live with. Claire was silent for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold. I need you to leave. Claire, no, I can't. I can't look at you right now. I need you to go. Lucas wanted to argue, to explain more, to somehow make this better. But he could see in Claire's face that there was nothing more to say right now. Okay, he said quietly. I'm leaving. But Claire, please, don't take this out on Nina. She's struggling enough. She needs her mother right now. Don't tell me what my daughter needs, Claire said sharply. You've done enough. Lucas left the hospital, walked out into the October night feeling like he'd just detonated a bomb in his life. He'd told the truth. Finally, after years of lying by omission. And it had cost him exactly what he'd been afraid of losing. He took a cab back to Brooklyn, sat in his apartment, and waited. For what? He wasn't sure. For Claire to call screaming, for Nina to text, for the world to make sense again. His phone stayed silent. The next morning, Lucas tried calling Claire. It went straight to voicemail. He tried texting. No response. He wanted to call the hospital to check on Nina but had no right to information, wasn't family. He was cut off completely, and the isolation was excruciating. 2 days passed in silence. Lucas went through the motions of work and life while feeling like he was underwater. He'd destroyed a 10-year friendship to tell a truth that needed telling, but the cost felt almost unbearable. On the third day, his phone rang, Claire's name on the screen. Hello? Lucas answered, heart pounding. I need you to come to my apartment, Claire said. Her voice was calmer, tired. We need to talk, really talk. Lucas took the subway to Queens, following the address to Claire's new place. It was smaller than the Brooklyn apartment, but bright, with plants in the windows and the feeling of someone trying to build something new. Claire let him in without a word, gestured to the couch. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. I've been at the hospital, she said, sitting across from him. Nina's being transferred to an inpatient program for 30 days. Intensive therapy, medication adjustment, the works. How is she? Fragile. Honest for the first time in years. Claire's voice cracked slightly. We talked. Really talked. She told me everything. About how she's felt about you since she was 18. About the kiss 3 years ago. About how she's been trying to move on and failing. About how keeping the secret felt like it was suffocating her. Lucas stayed quiet, letting Claire process. I'm angry, Claire continued. I'm hurt. I feel betrayed. You were my friend, Lucas, my closest friend, and you kept this massive secret from me. I know. I'm sorry. But I also... She took a shaky breath. I also understand why you did it. Nina explained how you stopped things from going further. How you chose our friendship over being with her. How you tried to do the right thing. She paused. And I've been thinking a lot about what right even means. Lucas looked at her, confused. What do you mean? I spent 27 years in a marriage doing what was right. Staying for Nina, staying because divorce felt like failure, staying because that's what you were supposed to do. And it made me miserable, made Richard miserable, made Nina grow up in a house full of people who were performing happiness instead of actually feeling it. She stood up, moved to the window. Nina told me something in the hospital. She said that watching me stay in that dead marriage taught her that loving someone inappropriate was better than settling for someone safe who didn't understand you. That she'd rather be alone than end up like me and Richard. Claire, she's right. Claire turned back to face him. I taught her that by example. And then when she found someone who actually saw her, who understood her, who made her feel less alone, I would have judged her for it, would have told her it was inappropriate, would have done exactly what I'm doing now. What are you doing now? I'm trying to figure out how to be angry at both of you while also understanding that you were trying to protect me, that you made yourselves miserable to spare my feelings. And I don't know if I should be grateful or furious or both. Lucas didn't know what to say. This wasn't the conversation he'd expected. Nina's doctor asked me something, Claire said. She asked if I thought Nina's relationship with you was exploitative or harmful. If you'd taken advantage of her in any way. She met Lucas's eyes. I told her no, that if anything, you'd been too careful, too protective, that you'd put my feelings ahead of both of yours. I don't regret that choice, Lucas said quietly. I don't regret choosing your friendship. Even if it meant both of you being miserable? Even then. Claire shook her head slowly. That's what I'm trying to understand, whether noble suffering is actually noble or just another form of lying. She sat back down. The doctor said Nina needs to rebuild her life on honesty. No more performing, no more pretending. And part of that honesty is admitting what she wants, even when it's complicated. What does she want? You, apparently, despite therapy and logic and all the reasons it doesn't make sense. Claire's voice was soft now, sad. And I've spent 3 days trying to figure out how I feel about that. About my daughter loving my friend, about the age gap, about all of it. And I'm still hurt, still feel betrayed, but I also... She paused. I also saw her face when she talked about you. Saw how she lights up in a way she never did with David or any of the other appropriate boyfriends. And I realized I have a choice. I can hold on to my anger and push both of you away. Or I can try to understand that sometimes people love each other in ways that don't fit neat categories. Lucas felt tears burning behind his eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't know how to be okay with this, but I also know that Nina is more important to me than my hurt feelings. And if being with you is what she needs to heal, to build a real life instead of a performance, Claire's voice broke, then I need to figure out how to accept that, even if I don't like it. Claire, I never wanted to hurt you. That was always the thing I was most afraid of. I know. And you succeeded in not hurting me for years by hurting both yourselves instead. She wiped her eyes. I'm not giving you my blessing. I want to be clear about that. This still feels wrong to me in a lot of ways. But I'm also not going to make Nina choose between having her mother and being honest about her feelings. I love her too much for that. Lucas felt something crack open in his chest, hope and fear mixing together. So what happens now? Now you visit Nina in the hospital and you both figure out what this actually is. Not what you're afraid it might be, not what other people think it should be. What it actually is when you stop running from it. Claire stood, and I'm going to try very hard to support my daughter while processing my own feelings about this mess. Thank you, Lucas said, the words inadequate for what she was offering. Don't thank me yet. This is going to be weird and uncomfortable, and I reserve the right to change my mind. She walked him to the door. But Lucas? If you hurt her, if you're doing this out of loneliness or ego or some midlife crisis thing, I will never forgive you. She's my daughter. She comes first, always. I understand. And Claire? She comes first for me too. Lucas visited Nina in the hospital that evening. The inpatient facility was nicer than the psychiatric ward, more like a wellness center than an institution. Nina was in a shared room, looking better than she had 3 days ago. Color back in her face, eyes clearer. You told her, Nina said when she saw him. I told her. And? And she's hurt and angry and trying very hard to understand. She gave us permission to figure this out. Not a blessing exactly, but permission. Nina's eyes filled with tears. She did? Yeah. Lucas sat in the chair beside her bed. But Nina, before we figure anything out, I need you to focus on getting better, really better. Not better because you think it'll lead to us being together, but better because you deserve to be healthy and whole. I know. My therapist here said the same thing, that I need to build a life that works whether you're in it or not. She's right. I hate that she's right, Nina said with a small smile. But yeah, I'm working on it. Actually working on it this time, not just performing recovery. They talked for an hour about her treatment plan, about the realization she was having in therapy, about building a life based on honesty rather than performance. Lucas listened, asked questions, tried to just be present without making it about them. As he was leaving, Nina caught his hand. Lucas? Thank you for telling her, for being brave enough to do what I couldn't. We'll both have to be brave going forward. If we're doing this, if we're really trying, we have to be honest about everything. I can do that, Nina said. I'm tired of lying to everyone, but especially to myself. Over the next month, Lucas visited Nina 3 times a week. Sometimes they talked about feelings and their complicated situation. More often, they talked about books and movies and Nina's research, staying in the realm of friendship while they both figured out what else they could be. Claire visited too, and the 3 of them had one extremely awkward session together with Nina's therapist, where they all tried to articulate their feelings and boundaries and fears. Claire cried. Nina cried. Lucas mostly sat there feeling guilty and grateful in equal measure. By the time Nina was discharged in November, they'd established some ground rules. Lucas and Nina would date, really date, openly, not hiding, but slowly. Claire wouldn't be involved in the details, but wouldn't oppose it. They'd all go to therapy separately and eventually together to process the complicated dynamics. It wasn't perfect. It was messy and uncomfortable and sometimes painful for all of them, but it was honest. Lucas and Nina's first real date was coffee in Greenwich Village, a public space where they could be themselves without the weight of secrecy. They talked for 3 hours, laughing and arguing and discovering each other all over again without the barriers of appropriateness. This is weird, Nina said at one point. Being able to just be with you without guilt or hiding. Good weird or bad weird? Good weird. Definitely good weird. They dated for 6 months before sleeping together, both of them wanting to make sure this was real and solid, and not just the release of years of pent-up longing. When it finally happened in Nina's small Greenwich Village apartment, it felt both momentous and perfectly natural. Afterward, lying in bed, Nina traced patterns on Lucas's chest. I spent so long thinking this would fix everything, that if we could just be together, all the emptiness would disappear. And it helps. You help. But I'm learning that no person can fix what's broken in you. You have to do that work yourself. Very therapist of you, Lucas said with a smile. I'm a therapist. It's literally my job to know this stuff. She kissed him softly. But having you here while I do the work, that makes it easier. They told Claire they were officially together over dinner 2 months later. She handled it better than expected, though Lucas could see the discomfort in her eyes. I'm trying, Claire said. It's still weird. Probably always will be weird. But I see how you are together and it's... She paused, searching for words. It's real. Whatever this is, it's real. It is, Nina agreed, taking Lucas's hand. And Mom, thank you for trying. I know it's not easy. Nothing about this has been easy, Claire said. But you're my daughter. Easy doesn't factor into it. Jamie came home for winter break, and Lucas had to explain he was dating someone. His son's reaction was predictably teenage. Is she cool? I think so. How old is she? 28. Jamie's eyebrows shot up. Damn, Dad. Okay, good for you. It's complicated. She's actually the daughter of a friend. That's not complicated. That's a sitcom. Jamie grinned. For real, though, are you happy? Lucas thought about Nina, about the life they were building together, about mornings waking up next to her and evenings talking about everything and nothing. Yeah, I'm happy. Then that's what matters. 2 years later, Nina's practice was thriving, and Lucas had started teaching design part-time at Pratt. They'd moved in together, a small place in Brooklyn that wasn't the building where everything started, but close enough to feel like home. Claire had adjusted, slowly and sometimes painfully, but she'd adjusted. She and Nina had rebuilt their relationship on a foundation of honesty, and while family dinners were sometimes awkward, they were also real in a way they'd never been before. One evening, sitting on their small balcony watching the sun set over Brooklyn, Nina turned to Lucas with a serious expression. I need to tell you something, she said. Lucas felt a flash of panic. What? I got a letter today, from a publisher. They want me to write a book about my dissertation research, about attachment and family systems and how we recreate our patterns. Nina, that's incredible. And I want to write about us, not explicitly, not identifying details, but about how sometimes the most inappropriate attachments can also be the most healing if handled with enough honesty and care. Lucas considered this. Your mother will know. I know. I already asked her permission. She said yes, as long as I change the details enough that no one else can identify us. What did you tell her the book would say? That sometimes loving someone means protecting them from yourself, and that sometimes it means having the courage to be honest about what you feel, even when it's uncomfortable. Nina took his hand. That boundaries exist to protect people, but living in fear of crossing them can be just as damaging as the crossing itself. Very nuanced, Lucas said with a smile. I'm a nuanced person. She kissed him. But really, are you okay with me writing about this? About us? Lucas thought about everything they'd been through, the years of denial, the secrets, the pain of staying apart, and the courage it took to finally be together. Thought about Claire's slow acceptance, Nina's recovery, the honest life they'd built from the wreckage of pretending. Write it, he said. Tell the story. Maybe someone else needs to hear that it's possible to navigate complicated things with integrity. 3 years after that conversation, Nina's book was published to critical acclaim. It won awards, got her invited to speak at conferences, established her as a leading voice in her field. Claire came to the book launch, stood proudly beside her daughter, and if she felt complicated emotions about a book partially inspired by her daughter's relationship with her former friend, she kept them to herself. Lucas watched Nina speak to a crowd of therapists and academics about honesty and boundaries and the courage it takes to build authentic relationships, and felt overwhelming pride. This brilliant woman, who'd almost been destroyed by trying to be acceptable, had instead turned her pain into something that helped others. Afterward, at the reception, Claire pulled Lucas aside. I need to tell you something, she said. Lucas braced himself, years of conditioning making him expect conflict. Thank you, Claire continued, for loving her well, for being patient with both of us, for proving that sometimes the inappropriate choice can actually be the right one if everyone's honest about it. I never thought I'd hear you say that, Lucas admitted. I never thought I'd be able to say it. She smiled, and it was genuine. But watching Nina these past few years, seeing her thrive, I can't argue with the results. Whatever this is, it's been good for her, for both of you. That night, back in their apartment, Nina and Lucas lay in bed talking about the book launch, about the future, about the life they'd built together. Do you ever regret it? Nina asked. The years we stayed apart? The time we lost? Lucas thought about this honestly. Sometimes, but those years also taught me things. Taught me that doing the right thing isn't always about following rules, that protecting people sometimes means letting them make their own choices, even complicated ones, that love isn't about possession or control, but about seeing someone clearly and choosing them anyway. Very wise, old man, Nina teased. I'm 53, not ancient. 53 and dating a 30-year-old, still kind of scandalous. We prefer unconventional. Nina laughed, then grew serious. I need to tell you something else. Another book? No. I've been thinking about the future, about what I want. She took a breath. And I think I want kids. Eventually, not now, but someday. And I know you already raised Jamie and you're older, and it's a lot to ask. Lucas pulled her close. Nina, I would love to have kids with you. If that's what you want, what we both want, then let's do it. Really? Really, though I reserve the right to complain about being tired. You're already always tired. Fair point. They lay there in comfortable silence, thinking about futures and possibilities, and the strange path that had led them to this moment. Lucas? Nina said softly. Yeah? Thank you for stopping me. That night 3 years ago, when I came to your apartment after the fight with my dad. Thank you for not crossing the line when I was too broken to protect myself. I'll always protect you, Nina, even from yourself when necessary. I know, that's why I love you. It was the first time either of them had said it out loud, though they'd been showing it in actions for years. I love you too, Lucas said. Inappropriately, completely, forever probably. Good, Nina said. Forever sounds about right. Years continued to pass, but they were different years now. Honest years. Lucas turned 55 and Nina 32. They got married in a small ceremony with just Claire, Jamie, Angela and her husband, and a few close friends. Claire cried during the vows, and Nina couldn't tell if they were happy or sad tears, but her mother hugged her afterward and said, I'm proud of you, which felt like its own kind of blessing. They had a daughter when Nina was 34, a beautiful chaos of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Lucas was indeed tired, but watching Nina as a mother, patient and honest, and teaching their daughter to name her feelings and ask for what she needed, made every exhausted moment worth it. Claire was an involved grandmother, showing up for babysitting and birthdays, rebuilding the relationship with her daughter through this new generation. The awkwardness faded slowly, replaced by something more solid and real. Jamie graduated college, started his own life, and would occasionally joke with his dad about how he'd ended up cooler in his 50s than most people in their 20s. Lucas took it as a compliment. One evening, when their daughter was 3 and finally asleep after an epic bedtime negotiation, Lucas and Nina sat on their couch with the particular exhaustion of parents of a toddler. I was thinking, Nina said, about that night in your apartment 10 years ago, when I tried to kiss you the first time and you stopped me. I think about that night sometimes too. What would have happened if you hadn't stopped? If we'd crossed the line then? Lucas considered this. Honestly, I think it would have destroyed everything. We weren't ready. I wasn't ready. It would have been built on all the wrong things, loneliness and need and avoidance, not what we have now. You think we needed to go through all that pain first? I think some things have to fall apart before they can be built right. He pulled her close. We had to learn how to be honest, how to choose each other with clear eyes instead of desperation, how to build something real instead of something we were using to avoid our actual problems. So all that suffering was necessary? I don't know if necessary is the right word, but meaningful, maybe. It taught us who we were separately before we became who we are together. Nina was quiet for a moment. My therapist would love that answer. You still seeing her? Once a month. Maintenance therapy. Keeping myself honest. She looked at him. You? Same. Turns out even at 55, I've still got work to do. We all do. That's the point. She kissed him softly. But doing the work together, with someone who sees you clearly and loves you anyway, that's the gift. Lucas thought about the years behind them and the years ahead. Thought about all the ways they'd almost destroyed themselves by trying to do the right thing, and how they'd finally found their way to something better than right, something true. Their daughter cried out in her sleep, and Nina stood to check on her. Lucas watched his wife, because she was his wife now, his partner, his choice, walk down the hallway and felt gratitude for every painful step that had led them here. The boundaries had held when they needed to hold, and when they finally came down, it was with intention and honesty and the hard-won knowledge that some rules were meant to protect you from hasty choices, not to prevent you from making brave ones. Lucas turned off the lights, checked the locks, and went to join his family. The apartment was small and cluttered with toys and smelled like the lavender lotion Nina used on their daughter. It was messy and real and completely imperfect. It was everything he'd been too afraid to want for so long. And finally, after years of choosing safety over truth, of protecting others at the expense of himself, of being noble instead of honest, Lucas Reed had learned that sometimes the most inappropriate love could also be the most right, as long as everyone was brave enough to stop lying about it. The story was over. The life was just beginning. And this time, when loneliness knocked, Lucas wasn't alone to answer it.